He saw his proc with huge horns and eyes red from madness and understood that only magic would save him. He thought of only one thing, that he needed her now more than ever, despite the fact that he was in great shape. In just a couple of minutes, everything was finished and the portal opened. The portal was opened on all the towers of the summoning palace. He stood and watched what was happening and thought that the summoning palace would soon begin to summon its victims through these portals. He thought that he should not miss his chance because the draft would start soon. The food he just ate turned out to be not very good. In fact, he was not in the cards for the near future. After being eliminated, he tried as hard as he could to be called up in 1996, but about 25 years had already passed. He had spent so much time here that he already felt at home. He understood that they would definitely come for him if he stayed in this position. He was very much irritated by these fucking magicians. He had no choice. So he decided that he should activate the Curtain of Lies special skill disguise target user. In the next moment, he activated this ability Curtain of the Liar and received the special skill disguise target user. His appearance was completely changed, both his face and the clothes he was wearing before. When he was completely changed, he realized that it was time for him to start learning magic. To get to the castle, he had to go through the white square of the summoning palace through an underground watercourse guarded by a huge dog. When he got closer to the guard, he shouted what kind of bastard was approaching him. The guard was ready. He didn't understand who this guy was, why he was so brave, because usually everyone was afraid of him. The guy took 2 steps forward towards the guard dog and swung his arm to hit him. His opponent was terribly outraged. The guy dealt blow after blow so that the guard had no chance to survive, and after another blow, he fell to the ground. The guy looked at the guard and said just one word, dog. Then I think for a long time he hung this dog up, tying a bloody scarf around its neck on which he wrote, "Go to hell with this damned world." The spear that was in the hands of this dog, the guy broke into 2 parts. He approached the entrance to the watercourse that this dog guarded, opened it and went inside the palace. He walked along a long corridor. I understand that it was hard for him to breathe, as the bloody stench became stronger and suffocated him. However, this was expected from the summoning palace. There were many corpses around that were lying in a pool of blood. He stood and looked at them all. Of course, he didn't want to go back to where he had already been and where he almost died last time. But he had no choice, and he had already decided that this was the only way to secretly learn magic. He understood that he needed to blend in with the crowd of recruits and get the quest. Then no one would pay attention to him. He was almost there, a few more steps, and he would be among the crowd. If he succeeded, only then would he be able to choose magic as a subclass. He took a step forward and realized that he would have to start all over again from the first level. Homunculus watched from above the people who were there. He laughed because he understood that these were useless people. He wanted to see what they would see today. The homunculus scolded the stupid magicians for rushing things. He wanted the humans to be handed over to them. He wanted to deal with the nasty leather bags. The tip of a spear that was tied to a clay rope whistled through the air. And it hit this homunculus right in the middle, so it pierced his stomach and sprayed in all directions. This vile creature was no longer so confident in itself. It did not understand what had happened to it. The homunculus hit the wall and then began to fall to the floor, leaving behind traces of blood. The guy pulled the rope towards himself so that the creature flew in the opposite direction. The guy said that the homunculus was caught on the hook. Then he grabbed him by his nasty little leg and began to hold him head down. The guy demanded a list of tasks from this homunculus. He didn't understand and shouted that he was a crazy scumbag. He hung upside down and continued to complain about what kind of list of tasks he needed. Most likely he had gone crazy and he would tear it to shreds. The guy didn't stand on ceremony for long, took one of his legs and tore it off, asking this homunculus how he would tear it into pieces. The guy stood there. His face was all covered in blood. He asked the homunculus that it was his choice, so he needed to ask another one. The homunculus couldn't stand it and told him to stop and wait. He opened his mouth and spat out a brightly glowing crystal and told the man to keep the task. The guy took this crystal in his hand and thought that he had succeeded, and now he knew the task. In fact, he received a task for the summoning square. He only needed to give an answer whether he could cope with this task, since he already knew the list of quests for the normal rank for a romantic. The conditions are to contemplate 2 moons from the summoning square. The reward is 1 palace token for the observer. The conditions are to read the inscription on the main gate out loud during the summoning. The reward is 1K of intuition for the soul, the company. The conditions are for 10 minutes of summoning to a comrade, and I can make a soulful gift. The reward is for the Black Hawk. At first it was necessary to increase his intuition, but he remembered that he was already cursed, and he chose an observer where it was a condition during the call to read the inscription on the main gate out loud. Only in this way he could get intuition. The homunculus asked for mercy for the man because he was in pain. The young man looked at him and decided that he was ready to spare him, of course. He took it with all his might, swung it, and then threw it against the brick wall so that it hit with all its might, and then left bloodstains on the wall began to slide down. The young man thought about the fact that these tasks, nothing was said about hidden missions. Was he really of low rank? He thought that this would be enough. He couldn't waste time because the draft was about to start and he couldn't wait any longer. So he decided to hurry up, and he headed to the very place where everyone else was supposed to be. He came closer and realized that they were here. Now his task was to become the same as all these guys. There were many young people in this room. They didn't understand where they were and what had happened to them. There was no connection here. They were outraged. Right under their feet, homunculi were running and laughing. They were happy that the day of the great judgment had come for these little people. They warned them to be careful if they did not want to die. One of the guys decided that they were filming a movie when he saw these creatures running under their feet. The other immediately thought that he was sleeping and it couldn't be serious. He was already inside among all the other guys. He thought that he had managed to blend in with the crowd. The only thing he needed was to activate the quest. Then he did it. He activated the summoning square quest. He thought it was great. He did it all right. The homunculi were running underfoot, saying that now everyone must accept the mission. Another of them was burning with impatience to kill one of these little people. One of the guys who got into this room couldn't hold back and started yelling at one of these creatures. What is he doing? Because he is a nobody, and let him bring his boss into this room. The homunculus, hearing these words, stopped. These words offended him greatly, and he could not pass by. The homunculus shouted at the man to repeat what he had just said. But without waiting for him to speak, two of the homunculi grabbed the guy by the legs. This guy screamed that he couldn't move. It was very hard for him. He stood like a stone. The homunculus kept tacoing this guy, and one of them climbed right on his head. The homunculus shouted to everyone else to pay attention and look at him. Then he grabbed this guy by the jaw and started to rip his mouth out. He said that this would happen to all the impudent people who would behave like this. This was exactly the fate that was destined for them. The homunculus daughter dealt with this guy. The other young people started shouting that this creature had killed a man. At that moment, he thought that the homunculi were on edge. Immediately after that, they heard a loud sound. This scream was so loud and piercing that everyone froze, not understanding what was happening. They wanted to know what it was, each asking the other if he had heard this piercing sound. One of the guys guessed that it seemed that this noise was behind the iron gates. They were interested in what would happen now. Someone really wanted to go home. He realized that the time had come and now everything would begin. A red plate appeared on his chest. At first it was not clear what was written on it. But when the reflection became clear, everyone realized that it was a warning saying that they could die. This red square appeared not only on his chest and on the chest of all the other guys who were there in the room. He thought of dying. He didn't come here for this, and especially he who had such power. It was a strange world for them. One of these guys with glasses said that he met someone who had returned from this world. Everyone looked at this guy carefully, after which he added that this returned one told that this world only recognizes those to whom it allows to survive all the trials. At that moment, on the chest of everyone who was in this room, there appeared a no longer red-green screen in front of them. On this screen was depicted the sword Azov. This sword was, for the rank of the lowest type of effect it also did not have, yet it was necessary to take it and fight to survive or die. The very next moment, everyone in this room had that same sword Azov in their hands. Many did not understand what to do. They wondered if those who came up with this really wanted them to fight. The homunculus addressed them as useless people and demanded that they make decisions as quickly as possible. He said either they should fight or they should run away, or there was a minute of silence. The homunculus told them all that if they did not do either the first or the second, they would be consumed, and laughed loudly. The boys held the sword in their hands, waiting for what would happen next. None of them could guess anything. They saw fog ahead of them. I don't understand who is hiding behind this fog. As the fog began to clear, they saw red glowing limbs approaching them. This creature was getting closer and closer. It resembled a huge insect. One of the guys shouted, "It's just a praying mantis." For some reason, at that moment, a smile appeared on his face. He was so happy because he almost shit his pants. And it was just an ordinary insect, despite the fact that it was gigantic in size. It was this insect that was making the same horrible sounds they had heard before, and now it was screaming too. Because this cry attracted all the insects and they began to attack people, there were a lot of them, even more than people. You could even say there were too many of them. People didn't have time to fight back. Many of them tried to run away, others resisted. The girl who tried to escape calmed herself down, thinking that it must be just a dream, just a terrible dream, and now she would open her eyes. She ran up to the guy, grabbed him, and started screaming that she was begging him to help her. She hid it behind his back, and in front of them stood that same huge praying mantis and many of his assistants just like him. Despite the fact that there were many people, many could no longer resist, and those who were still alive tried not to die. The guy entered into a fight with this Bogomolov, cut him into pieces. The girl stood behind him and was afraid to come out from behind her. At that moment, he thought that he had been using the battle for quite a long time, but the sword was also not bad. He thought that it would be better for him to wait a little longer so as not to stand out too much among all these other guys. They heard a scream when they turned their heads and saw that the guy in glasses, who had just been telling something, had lost his arm. This guy with glasses was shouting loudly that these fucking insects, he was trying to explain to them that they didn't even have a clue who he was. One of the guys told him not to act like he was some big shot or superhero. The guy who was behind swung and hit him several times. This guy had an Irokез on his head, and he said it was his 35th, no more likely 45th murder. Then he began to move forward, destroying these insects along the way. He was shouting at the guys who were standing in front that they were bothering him and to get out as quickly as possible. His face was covered in blood. If they didn't get out, they would die. The young man saw this guy Soroki Zam on his head out of the corner of his eye and thought that he was really worth something, and he himself struck the ball. He thought that this guy was really strong and he stood out from everyone else. Another group of guys decided that they should stick together. If they split up, they would definitely die. Well, even that didn't help them because there were no rules here. Everyone has to look after themselves. When the claws of this insect crushed one of these guys, he started screaming that he didn't want to die, but it was too late. The guy with glasses shouted to everyone who was still alive that they should press themselves against the wall. The survivors headed towards the wall and they all started to form a team. The guy with glasses was shouting that they needed to build a defense. If they didn't, they could die. He looked to the side and saw that there were already quite a few guys lying on the floor in pools of blood. The guy with glasses stood alone because his plan didn't work and he was very upset. The young man understood that nothing good could be expected from an ordinary office because it was a completely ill-conceived plan. And in this world he is simply useless. He swung to cut off the head of the insect that was in front of him. Another guy in a red t-shirt stood in front of the praying mantis. His whole body was shaking, but he was still alive. The praying mantis didn't attack this guy, it just looked at him. Then for some reason, this guy in the red t-shirt suddenly turned around and walked in the other direction and exhaled because he was still alive. The young man saw this picture and immediately thought that this guy was the chosen one. It was so predictable that he wasn't even interested anymore. He thought that they hadn't changed at all. Everything was the same as many years ago. On one of the balconies stood the two who directed this whole spectacle. The young man looked at them and thought that they were scumbags, but he couldn't do anything about it. The homunculi continued to shout at the guys who remained alive that they were just people and they needed more of a spectacle. The guys downstairs tried to get out of this room. They shouted that they didn't want to die and asked the homunculi for help, but they just laughed. Then they suddenly shouted, if people want to live, then let them run to the doors, and showed them the direction where to run. There stood a homunculus with a red flag. Everyone rushed to that door. They needed to get there as quickly as possible since it was unclear how many people would be released. Many were simply in shock. Some stumbled and fell. No one helped each other. One of the escapees shouted that he saw a flag. Another said that they could survive if they went out the door. And already several guys together with that very girl were very close to that door. Suddenly the guy with glasses stopped. His face was covered in blood. There was blood running down his face. In front of him was that same girl. It seemed like her body was being torn apart by some monster. She screamed for them not to come near. The guy in the glasses shouted loudly that there was something there and ordered everyone to stop. From this door, monsters with fiery eyes began to emerge, and one of these monsters swallowed the girl. These monsters are clearly more powerful and bloodthirsty than the praying mantises before them. They ate everything that was in their path. These monsters headed towards the guys who were right in front of them, and in turn, all the survivors began to run away. One of the guys started shouting why they were running back. Someone explained to him that there were monsters ahead, but he didn't agree because they could die if they went back. They only needed to go forward. They told him to go if he wanted to die. One of these guys put a scalpel to the other guy's throat and told everyone else to listen to him if they didn't want to die. The woman who was presented with a scalpel asked the man what he was doing because he was a doctor. He ordered her to shut up and asked if they knew how much money he spent to become the head doctor. He screamed at the top of his lungs that he had to survive. He was different from someone like her because she was worthless. The guy couldn't resist and decided to come up to him. He said that he was allowed to introduce himself. His name is Kim Sung-chol. When the doctor's hand relaxed, the woman managed to run away at that moment. The doctor began to shout what the hell was going on. Kim Sung-chol turned away and said it was his turn now. The doctor kept shouting. He said, "Is this guy really looking for a fight?" The guy turned around and threw the object towards the head doctor and said that it was a reward for his title of head doctor. The doctor held the object with one hand, but he no longer had the other. The guy completed the second task. Soul company for this was the reward of the Black Hawk Kuga, quickly and cunning like no one else. Kim Sung-chol turned around and left. He said he was busy, and then added that they would see him again. The doctor was in shock. Blood splashed into the doctor's face. He thought it was just a dream or just a nightmare. Everything that happened to the doctor at that moment was beyond the bounds of human thinking. He was not ready for it. Kim Sung-chol walked along this room past a praying mantis that was lying in the middle, and a bunch of guys who were no longer breathing there, was only blood around. The further he went, the more dead bodies there were. It seemed like there were only pipes and blood all around. He went to the wall and saw the inscription, "Let death grant freedom." This inscription was all in blood. He completed the third task of the observer, and his reward was an increase in intuition. Now he had a sensitive gift of observation. Kim Sung-chol thought that this was a very easy way to increase intuition. He looked and saw that now he could open the characteristics window. He read that using magic costs mana to generate destructive power. His strength was 999 plus agility, 853 endurance, 801, man at 3 intuition 9, and now +1 his indicators have increased. High level of intuition will help him understand magic. His intuition indicator was 9, so he definitely will not get a mage subclass. In order to get this subclass, he had to reach at least 10. Kim Sung-chol raised his head up and looked. He understood that here, he had only one task left to complete on this quest. There in the sky, he saw a huge planet. It was the planet from which he arrived, and next to it a small moon. At that moment, he received a message that the quest was completed, and his reward was 1 palace token. He became a romantic who was able to see the light even in difficult times. Kim Sung-chol thought that he finally got a palace token. If he collects too many, he will attract a lot of unnecessary attention. Probably 10 tones will be enough for him. Blue, yellow, white, red, in total, about 2,500 different people were called up this time, of which no more than 100 survived. The guy saw how the others were fighting to stay alive. He thought that he needed to get the mage class by any means necessary. He has already decided for himself that he will not care about anything around him. He will be merciless. He moved towards the very exit where the red flag was visible. This was the exit for those who remained alive. The red flag was getting closer and closer, so he was also getting closer to his goal. And when he approached this flag, after waiting a little, he understood that he should only go forward because soon everything would end. There were very few of them who were able to survive after the first test. The mission was over. Kim Sung-chol thought that, with the help of ordinary weights, he could only raise his intuition by 10, and this did not suit him at all. He decided that he needed to look for hidden quests among all the other guys who had reached the end. He didn't seem tired at all. The guys started getting to know each other. They thought it was the end. Kim Sung-chol looked at them and didn't understand why they weren't laughing and why they were so carefree. The guys started sharing their impressions with each other. One said that he was almost torn to pieces. Another that he thought he would really die. The third said that some idiot with a scalpel attacked him. Kim Sung-chol looked at these guys and saw that each of them, as he thought, had the eyes of a guard. The young man was very happy because he found a hidden quest and it could help him. The guy in glasses stood and watched everything that was happening. The only thing he could say was that it was hell. It was pure hell. Many people still hadn't stopped bleeding and were lying in a pool of blood. Someone was shouting that he had an injured arm and needed to call a doctor. Another one said that he couldn't see anything and screamed very loudly. The girl tried to bring the guy to his senses, told him not to die, and woke up. Another one of the victims begged to be let out of there. A guy in glasses approached a girl who was sitting on the floor and asked her if everything was okay. This girl had crazy eyes, and she smiled very strangely. She answered him that everyone was dead, then laughed and added that there was blood everywhere. This dream was too realistic. The guy in glasses heard someone nearby say that he had enough. He couldn't stand what was happening anymore. The girl started jumping. She behaved inappropriately. She screamed that everyone was dead. The guy with the arokes on his head waved his sword, finishing off the monster, and shouted that if they think he will die so easily, and if this is all they can show, then let them give him someone stronger. The homunculus watched everything that was happening and thought that there were still too many of them. Humanity had not even been half exterminated yet. He was disappointed. The homunculus came out to the survivors and said that he was merciful and he would give them a week to rest, during which time they should get used to the new world. Kim Sung-chol knew perfectly well that this week would not be merciful at all. As he said, there is no food or water here. The only way to survive is to escape. But what if it doesn't work out? The only way to survive in these conditions will be to eat people. That is, they must destroy each other. The young man turned around and began to look for the crowd of guys he had seen earlier. Step aside. He saw that this crowd was separate from the others, and they did not have injuries like everyone else. These couples were not clearly chosen, and most importantly, they are going somewhere. Most likely, they are being led by the eyes of the guard. The eyes of the guard are a device that selects people with special potential. The young man thought if he followed them, he would probably find the hidden quest he needed now. It was deep night outside, despite the fact that there were two objects in the sky, and they were shining brightly. One of the guys who was chosen said, "What the hell is this?" The other one answered that most likely someone will jump out again. All the guys laughed because one of them said that it looked like it would most likely be a wolf. Kim Sung-chol stood next to them and watched them. He knew that it really could be a wolf, and it was 3 times bigger than a man. The young man thought that there were more than 20 people here. Most likely they received shelter from a large guild. At the same time, one of the guys reported to the big guy that it seemed like all 25 people were there. He asked for forgiveness for suddenly taking over the helm of the main. This guy introduced himself and said that his name was Li Ye-hong, and he asked everyone if they could hear the voice of their leader. The others looked and said that yes, they really can't hear. One of the guys said that he could hear his voice. The girl said that sometimes she hears something. Kim Sung-chol. It became clear that someone threw a loud, empty-headed, it was so immature in his opinion it must be some low-ranking magician. This guy who is shouting around himself about the chosen ones started saying that he is glad that everything is okay with them. Then the guy turned to the young man and said that now all the difficulties were behind him. He smiled at him and added that he hoped they would see each other again. Kim Sung-chol looked at him silently. He had completely different plans. There was no light on the street. On the night, somewhere in the distance, something was glowing and you could barely hear laughter. The homunculus held a lantern in his hands and watched all the people who were here. He was interested in all of them being assembled. When the homunculus came closer, the chosen guys told their boss that this was the same one who attacked them. One of the guys asked if they were really trapped. The homunculus told them not to be afraid. He is the captain. He tears useless people to pieces and rewards the chosen ones. Kim Sung-chol was watching from the side. He was a little surprised that this homunculus introduced himself as a captain, which meant that he was a candidate or captain. He was a low-ranking magician. The homunculus told these guys to follow him as outstanding people, but if they backed down, they would die on the spot. The guy who took on the responsibility of being the commander of this group said that they should go after them. That's what the voices are saying. All the chosen ones had no choice but to follow the homunculus. They had no other options. One of the chosen guys began to wonder what he imagined himself to be. He couldn't come to terms with it. As they walked, they could not see that huge creatures with red eyes were hunting them from the side, but they did not approach them. The creatures resembled huge wolves, but for some unknown reason, they did not attack the chosen guys. The homunculus stopped and told everyone else to stop too because they were already there. In front of them was the cathedral of the forgotten god of order. It seemed abandoned, and it seemed like there was no one there. When they were already entering this cathedral, one of the guys said that it seemed to him that the eye was moving. The other noticed that he saw it too. The homunculus told them to stop their malachi pohu and quickly go inside. The guys did so and followed him. When they went inside, one of the guys asked what it was. The second added that they felt uneasy because of this eye located in the center. This hexagon emblem of the Cathedral of the Forgotten God of Order Palace of Summoning maintains neutrality in the name of the God of Order. Kim Sung-chol knew all this very well, but he thought how the wickedness was lost here he didn't know. The homunculus stood in the center and declared that it was enough to drown around them. They needed to quickly sit down opposite. The guys wanted to clarify what the God of Order meant and whether such a god existed and why they were brought here. Many of them got goosebumps from the eye that was in the center. The altar was an ordinary square. When they came closer, it began to move apart into 4 parts. And from this altar, many eyes began to appear, looking in different directions. In the darkness, these eyes were as red as those of the other monsters that were here. Then suddenly all these eyes started to glow with a bright light and illuminated everything around. All the chosen ones did not understand what was happening, what it was. They wanted an explanation and asked to be told. The homunculus told the chosen ones that they shouldn't be afraid, it's just a little control. Kim Sung-chul was a little upset because the light that fell on the others and the light that fell on him were different. This small check immediately revealed Kim Sung-chul. He was different from all the other guys in his energy. 1,000 eyes directed a multitude of laser beams in his direction that were supposed to destroy him. At that moment, the curtain the young man activated it was a special skill. It was necessary to distort the target for the eye of the guard. And when these rays hit the young man, there was a distortion of his energy field. The eyes could no longer see anything. They were completely disabled and rendered harmless. One of the chosen guys looked at Kim Sung-chul. I don't understand what's going on, but I understand that he is not his opponent. Servants of good and justice are certified by the will of order, the effect of which they have achieved is strength, endurance, agility, plus 10 restrictive zone summoning palace. The chosen ones began to rejoice because they felt that they were full of strength, and for the first time they felt this way, they decided that now that monster no longer seemed so scary to them. The young man could not even imagine that the candidate would immediately receive such advantages. This world oppresses the most Cains. The homunculus told the chosen ones to throw away these useless swords and take new ones because they are 10 times better than the previous ones. The chosen ones took the new balls. They noticed that they looked the same but were much lighter. Some even started shouting for the monsters to come to them because now they were ready to catch everyone. The homunculus explained to them that they were all chosen. He was the captain, and under their leadership they would pass the tests and return to the summoning palace. None of the chosen ones listened to him attentively. Everyone was busy getting a new sword. Another homunculus appeared in the room. He started shouting at the captain and ran towards them at high speed. This homunculus tried to tell the captain that he had brought another chosen one. The homunculus asked the chosen ones again, there are 25 people in the room, but behind the homunculus there is another one. The captain asked him again who he was. He was very angry. Why did he appear here? This guy told the captain not to be so stern because he hadn't introduced himself yet. The guy raised his hand and said that he apologized for being late. His name was Pak Aram. He was late only because he stayed too long in the toilet. The captain started shouting that this wouldn't work. The god of order had already given out blessings and weapons. The homunculus assistant said that the leader of the Iron Blood Knights personally selected this guy too. The captain wondered if the leader of the Iron Blood Knighthood had really chosen this guy. The guy was only confident in his abilities, so he told the captain so that he could hear, and that was the end of their acquaintance. The captain laughed and answered him that he did not dare to fool the captain, but he agreed and gave his approval. New answer, he will tear into pieces and kill this guy. Everyone else was no longer so cheerful at the sight of this picture. They stood and silently watched what was happening. Kim Sung-chul thought that most likely the knighthood from the Iron Blood would be taken away as he thought. At that moment he heard that during the day, someone was breathing loudly around him. This guy came very close and asked him if he was the rat who had sneaked in secretly. The young man turned his head, looked at him, assessed the situation, and thought what kind of idiot this was who decided to expose him. The homunculus got angry and started shouting that among them, there was a man who had managed to trick him. The guy standing behind the man insistently claimed that he was the one who had led the captain away. Kim Sung-chul thought that it was that idiot. He didn't understand why he was pestering him. The young man answered him that he was not afraid at all and that he should not stare at him. The guy raised his hand and said if he was wrong, then just let him forget about everything, but, judging by his clothes, one can say that he had already been in battle more than once. His clothes were indeed covered in blood. This guy kept talking about how one fight really takes that much effort. The young man chuckled and asked what this sharp criticism towards him was about. You were interrupting the conversation. The third one. These two turned and looked at him. The third one asked them if he could express his valuable opinion. It was the one who took on the responsibility of the main one. He asked them to introduce themselves. This guy said that he was Leonis and suggested that the young man do the same and introduce himself. Kim Sung-chul at that moment thought that this guy was quite smart, and he didn't really like it. Each of the chosen ones began to raise their hand and speak. One said that his name was Dorinus Winterler, and he was much better than any newbies. Another that his name was Afnadel. The third Gundamp said that he was Harry Motor. The guy who was standing behind the young man came up to him, put his hand on his shoulder and said that it was time for him to run. Then he looked at him and added that he couldn't just die, could he? The young man took a step forward and answered him. If so, then maybe he should stand in front. This guy did not expect such a turn of events and noticed that he was, of course, a man. Kim Sung-chul took a few steps forward, turned around and looked at this guy. He thought that they would really see who would die first. He needed to see what he could get from this call. He used the use of the secret guardian of the night claws, of the Black Hawk claws. Now he was absolutely sure that the guard's eyes were his, and he had complete control over them. The eyes of the guard that were above this guy were no longer under his control. They were under the control of the young man. Kim Sung-chul put out his hand so that the eyes of this guy's guard would be his. And the next moment, the guard's eyes were in his hand. The young man looked at the eyes of this guy's guard and thought that it was somehow strange. It seemed to him that something was wrong. Something had happened. He didn't understand whether it was worth holding it in his hands at all. They were terribly disgusting. Well, they came to him very easily. Everyone was interested in the name of the young man to whom the guard's eyes belonged. At first they forgot something, and then they said that they belonged to Krill Legal. Then the young man took the guard's eyes out of his hands and turned them to the side. They didn't understand what had happened. Their heads were spinning, but now he knew how he would imagine himself. The guard's eyes hit the wall and spread across it. The captain was very upset and began to demand the responsible magician. The young man was a little surprised. Did he really need it accordingly? But for what the next moment the young man presented as Krill Legal. The guy, when he heard his name, he couldn't even pronounce the word. He understood that it was the end. This guy started asking the young man what he just did. The captain kept repeating the same thing over and over again. He demanded a responsible magician. The guy screamed like crazy, trying to prove that Kim Sung-chul. He screamed that he is not real and they are all useless idiots. The captain was delighted when he found the responsible magician. This problem should have been solved. Homunculus ran up to this guy and hit him so hard he didn't even expect it. After a few blows, the guy fell to the floor, but the homunculus didn't stop beating him. The young man stood and watched everything that was happening. He understood that it was because of him, but he didn't want to do anything. The homunculus said that it would be bad if he killed this guy too early, and he would show him what happens behind the captain's trick. They grabbed this guy by the leg and pulled him along. He was covered in blood. The only thing he wanted to know was how the young man could refute it. Kim Sun could only shrug his shoulders. He had no choice. The next morning, all the chosen ones were gathered in the training camp and given a week to prepare. One of the chosen ones told the second one, if they stay with the action, they will die of hunger. He didn't understand why they should train then. The second one answered him that most likely these guys want to die and he wants to eat a lot. The young man understood that some die without even taking a single step, while the blessed candidates become stronger every day. He needed to keep an eye on them all so that it wouldn't turn out like last time, that one of them could expose him. He looked to one side and saw several guys training and they were doing quite well. Then he looked the other way and saw approximately the same picture. On the other hand, there were also a few guys who trained hard in this training camp. The young man thought that he shouldn't stand out too much and that it would be better for him to restrain his strength. He made several blows but understood that it was very difficult for him to restrain his strength. His blows were much stronger than the blows of these guys. Nia hit the dummy in front of him several times. He tried his best to keep the dummy intact. When he finished, he looked at it and thought that he had done everything perfectly. He walked and thought if he continues to control himself, then everything will work out for him. But he took a few steps forward and heard a crash. He realized that this was most likely the same dummy on which he had been training. All the other guys couldn't help themselves and turned towards him, wondering what it was. The young man decided not to stay with these guys and to run away from this place as quickly as possible. When several days had passed, it became clear that the guys who remained alive would not be able to be friends with each other for long. The guy who had an arrow case on his head said that he does not accept his group of weaklings. He was a conscript of the White Square Jongjong Sikh. He stated that he only takes winners, and then he stated that if they want to survive, they must kill at any cost. From both sides, the guys who remained alive or who had been alive for some time went at each other. The young man understood that the next stage of killing each other for survival had begun. He stood to the side watching what was happening. Some of these guys were no longer alive. Some were very exhausted and sitting on the ground. Among all of them, the young man saw the very guy who joined the chosen ones at the very end, whose name was Pak Aram. The young man thought that this guy mentioned knighthood iron blood. He decided that he should watch him. Some of those here said that they were very hungry, and maybe it was time for them to get out, to which they replied that he had gone crazy in this strange world. At any moment, someone could jump out at him. And then he was told if he wanted to live even one more day, Then he had to sit quietly and chew these breadcrumbs that were in his pocket, suddenly, unexpectedly, for everyone you chose apples their bread. The chosen ones were the first to pay attention to the food and turned their heads and immediately went to the food. Everyone ran up to them, grabbed as many as they could, shouted that it was his and he was going to eat it now, shouted to the other to let go of his food. Those who ran up did not let the others approach. They shouted for them to go away because it was only their food. One of the girls asked them to share with her, but no one heard her, despite the fact that she begged them. She heard the voice of one of the guys who was talking about how he was suddenly called. And it seems to him that the head of the knighthood of Iron Blood is the father whose face is unknown to him. At that moment, he was wiping his glasses. He explained that without any responsibility, it was a great burden for him. He stood right in front of her. After he wiped her glasses, he said that thanks to her, he got full and then took off her glasses. This guy asked the girl when she could see normally if she wanted to have a snack with him. The girl agreed, so the young man hugged her and asked her to come over. At that moment, he had the expression of a predator. The two of them went in the direction he pointed. A young man was watching all this and decided to follow them. It was already dark outside. The sky was red. It seemed like it was also all covered in blood. The young man continued to follow this pack into the thicket of the forest, not far from where all the others were. When he came closer, he saw the same girl that this guy had introduced analysis stings on the ground. Her stomach was torn open and her internal organs were sticking out and she was covered in blood. Her mouth was gagged, her glasses were broken, but her eyes were wide open. It seemed that she could still see everything. Well, in fact, she was dead. There was an apple lying next to her body, and it was like an outrage against her. The young man thought that this guy's jokes had gone too far, and then he realized that Pak Aram, a very bad person, he realized that this cannot be left unpunished. So he decided he had to go to the person in charge, Dulrance Winterler. He had business with him. It seemed that the forest at that moment became as red as the blood of this girl. The young man turned his head to the side, looked, and was a little surprised. Somewhere very close, he saw something glowing that caught his attention. He decided that he needed to get as close as possible to see what it was. When morning came, you could see all the guys who were still alive and were ready to move on. Despite the fact that they woke up, each of them went to eat something or finish what was left from yesterday. The guy in the blue shirt said that he was very hungry and now he would eat fried pig. He just wanted to fill his belly. The guy sitting next to him replied that many survivors don't have one like that. How can they afford it? But this guy wasn't going to agree with his opinion. He understood that many people had gotten the same thing. Another guy came up to them, who considered himself the most important among the chosen ones. He also thought that today he really wanted pork breast. Then it was clear that he was not the only guy in a blue shirt who thought that he was almost disappointed, but now he has hope. One of these guys asked if they saw Kim Sung-chul because he was not there. Time is longer than ever, and it seemed like she had been here for an eternity. When the young man approached what seemed to him to be glowing objects, he realized that these were strange clots. It became clear to him that things were getting hot here, and that new events would soon occur. He understood that most likely there would be another selection very soon. There was a lot of clot in front of him. It was the first time he had seen so much clot in one place. He decided that most likely all those who could not survive were destroyed in this way, and all their blood smells were here. When he turned around, these clots merged and became a huge lump that hung behind him. The young man saw it out of the corner of his eye. He was an experienced fighter, so he wasn't going to leave it like that. He turned sharply and struck the huge godfather, again breaking him into many small clots. He stood around him, and a lot of small clots were flying around him. It was not by chance that they appeared here. He was prepared for the fact that they would all start attacking at the same time. He needed to figure out how best to fight them off. These SGUs united into one big hole and tried to attack him again. The young man did not lose his head and swung again to break these blood clots into many small ones so that they could not connect. There were still a large number of blood clots on the ground that were joining together and trying to attack him. The young man also dealt with them very quickly, dividing them into hundreds of small pieces. At the same time, where the rest of the chosen ones were, one of the guys turned his head and did not understand what was happening. Then not only he and another guy saw that right in front of them, there were many clots. They also did not understand what it was. One of them asked what it was. The second said that these clots were heading somewhere. One of the guys took a stick and told everyone else to look at how one of these lumps can't get out, and then he added that everyone else shouldn't worry because they're stupid. Imagine his surprise when this blood jumped right at the young man. This lump of blood covered the young man's hand so that he suddenly began to scream loudly. When he was able to throw off this lump, He then realized that there was something wrong with his hand. He threw this lump and hit the second guy right in the face. He didn't even have time to do anything. The chief of the Chosen One shouted for everyone to be careful. He wanted to warn the others. They managed to understand only one thing. These blood clots catch the smell of blood and rush towards it, so you need to stay as far away from them as possible. Kim Sung-chol, when he approached the other guys, he told them to get up if they don't want to die. One of the guys continued to lie, leaning against a huge stone. He didn't even move. Others, on the contrary, wanted to run away as far as possible from this place so as not to encounter these incomprehensible creatures. When the guy near the stone saw what was happening, he started to back away. "I don't understand what the hell this is." Everyone else started shouting that they needed to run away from this place as quickly as possible. The guy in the blue shirt stopped to catch his breath. He was very amused by this situation, that he was trying to escape. The guy in the blue shirt thought that all the other candidates were pathetic, so they were trying to run away from the place. Kim Sung-chol didn't think for long. Being in the back, he swung and hit him with all his might from behind on the back, so that this guy flew away and landed on his knees. Then there followed several more blows, such that the guy could not see who was striking him from behind. Eventually he got up to see who his opponent was, but he couldn't see anything. There was fog in front of him. So this guy shouted who he was and demanded that he come out right now. But there was a thick fog in front, and it was impossible to see who was striking him with blow after blow. He couldn't even open his eyes to understand that it was the enemy who attacked him. After the blow from behind, the young man dealt him several more blows to the jaw, causing his front teeth to fly out. And then another blow with all his might, so that this guy in the blue shirt flew very far away, so far that it rose above the tops of the fir trees in this forest. And then by the force he began to fall down between the trees. The height was very great. He fell on one of the fields with great force because the blow he received was incredibly strong. This guy was lying on the ground with his legs spread out in different directions, and he couldn't move them. Clumps of blood began to approach him. They felt fresh blood and moved towards the guy. The guy raised his head and started asking who did it and cursing at the nasty slime, how it dared to approach him. Kim Sung-chol thought that this guy Park Aram should die. At least he hoped so. The slime got so close that it grabbed one of his legs. He felt severe pain but could not do anything. He had no choice but to scream very loudly so that someone would hear him and help him. But very soon he felt that he had no strength and he couldn't even scream. This blood clot began to devour his leg. He still tried to scream for some time in the hope of being saved. And he almost succeeded. A bright magnetic circle appeared on him, which arrived to save him. It seemed that everything around was illuminated by a magical light, which meant that one of the magicians had arrived to save him. The light that came from this magic ring sank lower and lower and was practically on the ground. All these blood clots were frozen in one moment and turned into blocks of ice. The magician who came to save this guy started to go down to see what happened to him. There was snow all around. These mages associated with the white square were the mid-ranking mage Dolrance Winterler. She thought she couldn't even believe she got such a blockhead. Well, the young man watched everything that was happening and thought that this was the same move associated with knighthood with iron blood, and he knew that her name was Dolris. When the magician landed on the ground, she looked at the situation that was around her ward. She immediately used her wand and the spell Freezing Abyss. After she cast the spell, everything around turned into a truly chilling abyss. Everything was white. Even the huge clots of blood that approached them became transparent and looked like huge blocks of ice. Put them together, and she broke these clots into many small drops that dripped around her. It looked like blood rain. The young man watched her from a distance and knew for sure that it was the magician Dolris Winterler. He looked at her and clearly understood that judging by the speed of the spell and the damage it deals, she was of average rank. The magician approached the guy lying on the ground and told him to get up. The guy mumbled something, barely breathing, but it was unclear what it was. Raising his body a little higher, he told her why she only showed up now he was dying of pain, and he would tell his father to throw out her useless fool. She threw him a flask with the potion. I told him to drink it, adding that he was very lucky to get off with only a little pain. Then she added that he should stop pretending. She would have problems if he died. The guy immediately drank all the contents that were given to him. He was very scared that he could die. The mage told him to use hidden quests to increase his stamina. All this was heard by a young man who was standing very close. He also heard about the hidden quests, after which the guy stood up and they went with the magician to increase his stamina. He walked and swore, where did she get on his head? He understood that it was just training, but he did not understand how he was supposed to cope with it at all. The magician walked behind and said that she could hear everything perfectly well, to which the guy replied that he was deliberately speaking loudly so that she would definitely hear. It was too hard for him. The magician didn't understand how hard it could be for him, because the slime almost ate him, and he continued to complain about the difficulties. The guy said that he didn't know his wonderful father's face. He sent her in his name to save him. The magician said that she would help him with everything else, but he had to deal with this on his own. After all, the test that he has to go through is the test of Vestiar and the hero Chill. He completed it himself. He asked to be told more details. The homunculus who was walking with them laughed, and then answered him that the hero was strong enough, and this guy would need strength, and he would see everything tomorrow. Kim Sung-chul heard that they had to go through more tests. Vestiar finally caught a big fish. Kim Sung-chul show in the dark tunnel ahead. Somewhere far away there was light. He lowered his head down and saw that he had tripped, and the stones were lying on the ground. He wondered if it was a shelling. It was unclear where it came from, but it looked like it was her. Everything he saw, met, and came across on his way was as if it was not just like that, it was all Vestiar. The young man thought that she had reached her limit, although there were rumors that she had special echo skills. He thought that in that case he should take a look, since he had never met her before. He was interested in how the hero got the title of the book, Disaster. Most likely it was one of the quests. The very next moment he was asked what he wanted, then he definitely thought it was a quest. And if this is so, then it would probably be better for him to choose the most difficult one, which is what he did. They told him that he dared to choose the hero Chill of the eternal nightmare Vestiar. They asked him to prepare to taste death in the endless darkness. Then the young man realized that this mission was created for the successors. He considered himself lucky that there was still some faith in humanity left. Dark creatures similar to an octopus began to approach him, only they moved in the air. The young man took a deep breath and smelled a familiar smell again. It was the smell of blood. He thought if there is still faith in humanity, then most likely someone was sacrificed. He could not even imagine that it could be him. This creature that was above his head said that a little more, and it would swallow the young man. It grew bigger and bigger and affected the young man's brain to change the picture before his eyes. After a while, he could no longer see anything in front of him. He only heard pleasant music that was coming from somewhere very close. He tried to pull himself together and think about the fact that the quest was called Endless Darkness, but everything was completely different. In front of him was a beach and a lot of girls. He sat in a lounge chair and watched the girls play volleyball. He didn't even want to leave. One of the girls playing came up to him and called him. The young man was a little confused. She asked him if he wanted to play. All the other girls looked at him expectantly. The young man stood up and asked if they wanted to play with him. Then he went behind his deck chair. Turning around, he had a huge sledgehammer in his hands, and he assumed his usual appearance and told these girls that all this sounded cool. Immediately after that, the girls in bathing suits became different, and their eyes were red and black sand appeared around them. The young man swung his sledgehammer to deliver his usual blow and asked what happened to their faces. She hit him again, and he asked them again if they were really upset that he turned out to be an old fart. Immediately after this, the creature that was holding the young man's head opened its mouth, and it seemed that it was about to swallow his entire head. That's exactly what happened. It went down to swallow the young man's head completely. At first, this creature was red. Then it started to glow neon blue. And this creature began to descend lower and lower, absorbing the young man. At first, he saw some light before his eyes, but then it became darker and darker. He tried to open his eyes, but felt that he had no strength at all. When he opened his eyes a little more, he saw that he was shackled hand and foot. His hands were crucified by forged iron handcuffs. He was hanging on chains. In front of him, he saw a fairly large number of mantises that were ready to cling to his body. These vile animals attacked him from different sides, trying to tear him apart. Apart from the fact that his hands were crucified, and under the tension of chains and his legs were also chained, he could not do anything. He heard a vile voice that laughed, and which the destroyer told him. Then this one said that a man cannot kill him, because he is much stronger than him. In front of him was a demon king. The young man felt that he had been wounded many times and was covered in blood. The young man decided to use the only thing he had with his hand, chains. After wrapping the demon king in chains several times, he pulled him towards himself. Then the young man took out his huge hammer, which he had not parted with lately, and swung it to strike. When he swung himself, and then everything around immediately lit up and said that the darkness had disappeared into oblivion. Kim Sung-chul. This huge dark creature was broken into many small creatures that could not harm it. He reached out with his hand and removed one of these creatures from his head. He didn't want to admit it, but he had an unshakable strength. If someone tried to attack his mind, it definitely won't work on him. Immediately after he came out of that state, he felt something approaching him from behind, and this energy that was approaching was quite strange. He turned to look. A fragment of Vestiar's memory was approaching him from behind. She said that it had destroyed all her native spirits. The young man understood that this was not Vestiar herself. It was just a small fragment of her memory. It was surprising that one fragment contained so much magical power. That's why it's called a memory fragment. She said that only those who manage to overcome 32 pleasures and 27 planes will be able to get the award. The young man answered her that everything had already been cleared and he had already dealt with everyone himself. Then she told him that he was a very interesting person. Kim's son thought about it now. Some fragment is laughing. And if this is so, then it seems that a piece of consciousness remains in it. Fragment said that he managed to reveal it. This does not somewhat overstate her expectations. The young man said that he didn't care who she was, he would get the award anyway, and swung his hammer. He stood and his hammer was right in front of him. He thought that he could complete this quest. Fragment told him that if he is so confident in himself, then go ahead and try. Her eyes flashed a fiery red color, and she told him once again that he could go forward. The young man stood in place, and a magic circle formed around him that glowed brightly. Then everything around exploded, and it seemed like he couldn't get out of this magic circle. The young man thought that it was magic that restricted his movement. He stood, and around him there was like a sticky web on all sides. After which the fragment directed a fire towards him that moved in a circle and was supposed to burn everything in its path. The fragment cast a spell that was supposed to destroy the guy with fire. Kim's son got out of this sticky web and said that these cheap tricks won't work on him. The fire that was directed towards him hit one of the searchers. After this blow, the fragment saw that the young man was above the smoke from the fire, and he was absolutely not damaged. At this point, the fragment moved very quickly in the other direction in order to continue its attack. But the young man didn't have time to regroup. He struck, but the fragment was no longer there. He turned his head and saw that the fragment was behind him. She also formed another fireball, which she was going to direct towards the young man. When this ball became large enough, she directed it towards him. Kim-san saw what was happening and told her that it would not affect him because he was completely prepared for it. Well, what happened next he didn't expect, but he knew that this fragment had a secret echo technique. The young man could now understand what an echo was and how it all looked. He stood and watched everything that was happening and how she sent one fireball after another in his direction. Using her secret technique, it was all not bad. Fragment was completely sure that this young man would not be able to cope with this quest, and this was the end for him. Well, everything was not so at all. He resisted the flies using his strength and additional capabilities. Having risen to a height, he made several blows on one rock so that it began to fall down. I could hear the fragment as the young man began to whine. I told her to stop. It was too little to kill her. He came closer to her and asked where the hero Chill was in this situation. This was the only thing he wanted to know from her. She told him about the fragment, that he is really strong if he follows them, then they will meet him according to the prophecy of fate. The young man swung to deliver another blow to finish her off. Now everything was clear to him. The fragment said that he was like them. The young man was almost ready to kill her, but upon hearing these words, he stopped and asked again what she meant. In fact, this disappointment was much stronger than they had. The young man thought about it because it was exactly like that. And then she added, because she wanted to know what he would do if his hope was scattered like ashes in the wind. The young man couldn't hold back and shouted at her to shut her mouth. Then he closed in and struck her with his hammer. He didn't want to hear her, and only by striking her in this way could he shut her mouth. She could no longer say a word because the huge young man had flattened her entire face. In ancient times, which no one even dares to remember now, people were called to an unusual world. While the irresponsible gods thought only of themselves, the underdeveloped, cruel, but noble people made a sacrifice. They did this for one purpose only, to get rid of future disasters. Until the time when the battles were taking place, 7 heroes stood out in the center of the event who were much stronger than all the others. Despite the fact that all 7 of these heroes were quite strong and had magical powers, all the legends about them had a sad end. On the land where the army of the devil and the strange world entered, 7 forgotten creatures were to rise in the name of an ancient promise through blood and death, disease and war. There was a document testifying to their decomposition. It stated that the forgotten heroes would soon rise and bring destruction. Kim-sun knew for sure that this would never affect him. He didn't want to repeat their fate. After he dealt the final blow, he took a few steps forward. He needed to test his abilities. To do this, he only needed to look at the table where it was said that he had destroyed Vestiar's wish, and he had achieved the status of a dream destroyer. His reward was 30 palace tokens, magical power, intuition, resistance to spells +10, and a magical moonlight mace. When he read it, he thought, is this really all from the other side? And the only thing that made him happy was that his intuition had risen. He thought that he needed to be happy. Then he received a message that 7 heroes noticed his presence, and the next message that he managed to read was that 7 heroes were looking at him. The young man thought that it was very nice of them, but he didn't need these explanations. Then he received a message that Vestiar was presenting him with a special gift, the Book of the Weaver Echo. This book contains Vestiar's secret skills that allow him to use similar spells in their sequence. He took it in his hands, and it showed him that this was some kind of legendary artifact. The very next moment, if this book was in his hands, he thought that it was worth opening it. He received a message to use the book and receive the Vestiar until the end of the call. The requirements were magical power above 20, intuition above 20, resistance to spells above 20. 50 palace tokens are needed for this. The young man was a little upset because he needed at least 50 tokens and he still had to work and work to get them. You even time in another part where there was magic, everything did not go according to plan. One of them could not find Chan Hyun-suk. It is not clear where he went. The magician walked around his room. He was nervous because he had to hand in a report tomorrow morning. He was very angry because his life depended on it, but he couldn't do anything. He went up to the trash to take another look. He needed to do this before the signal disappeared. While he was looking, he realized that the images were somehow blurry and everything was unstable. Strangely, he did not understand what was happening. He heard that the guy wanted to know his name. The guy he saw asked him to repeat it again. Then he thought something was wrong here, and why was this guy asking his name twice? At first it seemed very suspicious to him, and he thought about it all, but then he decided that it was all impossible. He began to reassure himself that the eye of the guard, and sometimes just malfunctions because the birds interfere with his work. And all this could have happened because the weather outside was bad, and there was interference. Then he decided that he needed to go and ask his older comrades for help, or rather for the watchman's eye, the magician. Then he turned to hold a cup of coffee in his hands. She asked again if he really wanted her to report her watchman's eye to him. He stood in front of her and once again asked her generously to do it. She looked at him and asked what would happen if she didn't want to do it, but she continued drinking coffee. She added that he was not able to cope with his own, and he came to her and complained that he had never seen such terrible students. He answered her that he needed help only once. She got angry and screamed so loudly that everything around her shook, asking him to get out of her sight. He covered his face with his hands and started making excuses about how he was really sorry and didn't want to upset her. She said that she will not report to the top, otherwise tomorrow will be the end for him. He will be caught. Upset, he went out and walked down the long corridor to his room. He stopped near one of the columns because he felt uneasy and swore at her. He thought that she was a very cunning bitch and an ordinary piece of shit. At that time, another person walked down the corridor. The magician did not stop crying. He stood near the column and wiped the tears from his eyes. A man with a snake tattoo on his head asked him why the young man was in such despair. Was it all because his girlfriend dumped him? He turned around and answered sharply that it was none of his business. The guy didn't understand how some pathetic slave dared to talk to him. Then the man couldn't stand it and said if that wasn't the reason, then most likely he had lost his pet rabbit, and laughed it was the Arab hunter Christian. These words made the young man even more angry, and he was already thinking about something completely different. There were no more tears in his eyes. The guy said he wasn't in the mood to chat, turned around and walked in the opposite direction from the goods. Despite this, the slave hunter told him that this was of course sad, but he should not be afraid because this was not the end. When he heard these words, he thought about them. Was there really any truth in his words? The hunter, who had a hook instead of a hand and a huge, ugly scar on his face, said that the boy's suffering took him back to his youth. The guy then asked him if he was the same, to which he heard the answer that the hunter was also a nurse, but he was unlucky. And then he added, "Is it possible to predict the betrayal of a comrade whom you trusted?" The guy was very happy, stopped and thought that this could be his salvation. He approached the hunter, lowered his head and said that he was asking for forgiveness, and asked if he could help him since he had almost no time left. The hunter held out a hook instead of his hand on which hung the key. He said that this key was from the enemies leading to the summoning square. Then the hunter looked at the guy, smiled and asked him if he knew where all the slaves were. The guy asked again whether he should find it himself and heard the answer that this would be the best solution, after which he took the key and left. He really needed to make sure himself in order to submit the report. When he walked to these gates, he passed by the cells where the prisoners were sitting. They were barely alive and were all covered in blood. The guy could barely contain himself from this terrible sight. He felt uneasy. As he passed, he met 2 homunculi. They wanted to clarify whether he was a human. If so, then they were already ready to attack him. Homunculus come closer to him. They started demanding candy from him. They pulled his things and demanded candy from him. The guy couldn't stand it and shouted for them to let him go. He wasn't going to take away his father's ceremony, so he instantly destroyed them. He was indignant as the pathetic homunculi came close to him with one swing of his hand in which he held a sword. He destroyed both of them. Because of this, his body and his things became all covered in blood. His face was also covered in blood. He thought that these homunculi were just idiots. Since his face was all bloody, he was even more angry. He took the cape that was hanging. He put it on his head and told himself that when he finds the missing Chanhyun Sukto, he will deal with him. He will find him no matter what it takes. Even time Kim Sung-chul returned to the camp where the rest of the chosen ones were. He thought that now he would have to carry even more with him. So in order to not be so noticeable, he decided that he needed to open the soul storage. This was his place where he collected all the items he needed and could use them at any time. Having sent there the book which he received as a reward since he could not use it now, he did not have enough money for it. He had quite a few items that were in this storage and were waiting for their moment. He decided that he would sort out his storage later, but he still had a new retinue for the staff, and this staff had some useless characteristics. Well, he understood that the first raiding match would soon begin, and he draws that he should probably leave it because the light was a low rarity. It was magical, and it had the effect of redeeming charge. Moonlight returns 70% of the emitted energy with a boomerang note. He made it from tree bark, absorbing moon color. It was a fragile object. Although outwardly he was nothing special, he could not believe that he still had 9 points of intuition left to reach the magic class. He also has almost no palace tokens, but he was not going to avoid the raiding match. He decided that he should go back to everyone else despite what had happened to him. He needed to move on. After some time, he was already in the palace. He only needed to go inside. When he entered one of the rooms, he saw many homunculi running and delivering food. They were shouting that they were doing all this to people. The homunculus brought a lot of food in a wheelbarrow and said that they were handing out this food only for tomorrow's fights. A fight and a scandal started among the people again. One shouted that he was the first to grab, another pushed with his elbows and told him to get lost. Everyone wanted to grab as much as possible. Someone said that they should grab one at a time, otherwise they could die. The homunculus told them to eat until they were full, so that tomorrow they could show what they were capable of. Kim Sun knew perfectly well that tomorrow there would be a raiding match. This competition would weed out people who were unable to survive in this strange world. One of the spectators who was watching all the people asked again if the match was already tomorrow, and he was told that it had most likely been postponed. The guy in the blue shirt stood and looked at all these people from above. He noticed that these people pounced on the bread like a pack of stray dogs. Kim Sun understood that every raiding match ends with a trial of days of death, and sometimes, due to the difficulty of the test, more than half die. He looked at the rest of the chosen ones and thought that there was nothing he could do about it, and he should play along with them some more. He still lacked intuitions and tokens, so he needed to participate in additional quests. He looked at this guy in order to find out new hidden quests. He had no time at all. He needed to increase his intuition. In order to use the Book of the Echo Weaver, he had to become stronger and also keep an eye on that jerk Pak Aram. The guy who called the chief among the chosen ones said that they also need to go around and have a snack, despite the fact that they did not participate in this massacre for a piece of bread. Everyone else listened to him and followed him. There was no competition between them at the moment. Kim Sun remained sitting in the arena. Someone called him. He did not even turn his head and did not look. When the guy came closer, he asked the young man if he wanted to eat with him. Kim Sun does not turn around, and despite him raised his hand and said that he is hungry. The guy who approached him said that he understood that he was worried about the match, but food would give him energy and eating alone was boring. Kim Sun smiled and told the guy that at least he was honest and wasn't making up excuses to get to know him. This guy started talking about how despite his appearance now, before being called into this world, he would have been very successful. And by the way, about that day he was driving a car when suddenly then he fell silent and asked if Kim Sun wanted ramen. The young man stared at one point and did not hear at all what was being said to him. He was thinking only about how to pass tomorrow's competition. He understood perfectly well that at the end of the match they would start betting on one of the three. Most likely in the first round you will have to fight against Alamoral or Pac-Man. Well, he also understood that the difficulty depends not only on the monster itself, but also on the conditions in which these battles will take place. So he ate in order to still hang. I will think what he will do tomorrow. He looked at the people who were below. They had eaten too much from their greed and could not move. Many simply fell to the ground. Suddenly, among all these people, he noticed a red robe, and this interested him greatly. The young man wondered if this was a necromancer, but why was he down there among all the other people? This guy in the red robe kept walking and repeating the same thing that he would find his Chan Hyun Suk, no matter what it cost him. He was so determined, despite the fact that it was already evening outside, that he was only thinking about how to find his ward. So he was ready to get close to the magician and attract all forces in order to find his ward. He had to submit a report and, like all the other mages, attend the ceremony before the qualifying battle. This ceremony was intended for the enemies, without which they would be destroyed. From this abyss, they called for help from monsters who were supposed to help them. People continued to fight over snacks, or one shouted for him to give it back. The other said that he was the first to take it. All this was observed by a guy in a red robe. Someone pushed him from behind to take away a piece of bread. He didn't even have time to understand anything. Then this guy in the red mandy fell to the ground, and the bread fell next to him. Everyone else turned and looked in his direction, and there was only a mad thirst for food in his eyes. When they saw the bread, they started shouting, that he was shouting at one another, that he was completely out of his mind, because he was. The fight continued for this piece of bread. The guy in the red robe stepped aside. At that moment, he realized that there was not a single candidate here. He wondered where they had gathered then. Raising his head, he saw that the chosen ones were in one of the arenas, and they did not go down to all the others. He looked and saw that Ye Hong was there, and next to him was Bi Sun Hee, but he couldn't find his ward. He started counting them. There were exactly 25 of them, all in place. Probably his ward was somewhere among them. Look carefully, he saw Kim Sung-chul. He thought, who is this? It is unclear why he was with the others and the chosen ones and where the eyes of the guard were. At that moment, the guy in the red robe realized that this young man had pulled something off. Kim Sung-chul felt a gaze on him and realized that this red mandy guy was looking at him. Kim Sun suddenly stood up and left, saying that it was time for him to go. He understood that this guy had come specifically for him. The young man walked along a long, poorly lit corridor, and he was already prepared for the fact that he would now have an unexpected meeting. That's exactly what happened. The guy in the red mandy grabbed the young man's jacket and pulled him back. Then the guy in the red mandy grabbed him from behind and presented a sharp dagger to his neck, telling him that he was an imposter and let him tell who he was. Kim Sun looked at the guy's hands and realized that, judging by his hands, he was not a necromancer. After all, he had just recently managed to cross his path. The guy in Monty said that the young man was following him, and if he did something weird, he would kill him right away. He had no choice but to leave this castle without anyone seeing him. And as soon as they came out, Kim Sung-chul immediately neutralized this guy in a robe so that he didn't even have time to resist. He fell to the ground. Kim Sun stood over him and looked at him, wondering who this guy was and why he was following him. The guy in the robe barely opened his eyes. He wondered what kind of monster it was that attacked him. At that moment, Kim Sun clearly realized that it was not a necromancer. He had a very strange act. The guy stood up on the ground and began to beg for mercy, because he was an ordinary magician who came to look for a conscript. Namely, his protege was Chan Hyun Suk. The young man noticed that this was the guy who was also called a hare. The magician asked the young man what had happened to him, since that was exactly why he had come here. Kim Sun scratched his ear and said that the guy he was looking for had already died. The magician was very upset. Tears started flowing from his eyes. He said that he was not ready for such a turn of events. The magician started shouting that he didn't want to die so easily. He still wanted to live. The magician stood before the young man on his knees and begged him. Kim Sun said that he was right and threw him a bag of money. Then he added that this guy really is too early to die, so if he wants to live, he should help him. The magician was silent for a while. He had a chance. He looked at the bag that lay in front of him. Kim Sun said that he would be put alive if he tried very hard. Several emeralds fell out of this bag. The magician could not refuse. After some time, the servants tried to deliver this magician to his masters. When they led him, he shouted to be seated. The huge man stood with his back to the magician and asked again what his name was. The magician answered, Krill Legal. The magician told everything clearly and honestly as it really was. This high-ranking member of the knighthood said to the magician that he sees that he is being honest with him. And then he added that he doesn't like those who can only talk like me, and suggested that the magician return to work, taking one of the emeralds in his hands. The magician was very surprised. He did not understand what kind of work he had to return to, because his ward was no longer alive. A member of the knighthood told him that he actually thought the magician was much smarter. After all, in fact, Jang Hyun-sung was not killed, but he is alive. This high-ranking member of the Iron Blood Knighthood was called Ma Sang-gil. The magician remembered the words of the young man when he threw him a bag with these emeralds. He said that if the magician gives them this bag, they will pretend to spare him, but they will never forgive him for anything. The magician now clearly understood that everything had happened exactly as he had told him, after which he had no choice but to return to his room and continue working. But first he decided that he needed to pass the note to Kim Sun Chol. For this, he sent his assistant. His assistant listened to all the requirements and was ready to carry out the task within a few seconds. His superhero assistant flew out of the magician's window and headed towards Kim Sun. Within a few minutes, the messenger delivered a note to the young man who was in the forest. This note was a warning about tomorrow. It had all the rules for tomorrow's great duel. Seek it with zombies summoning waves. 1, 3, 10, 20 zombies. Special reward is awarded only after third-place bonus monsters in red hats. The young man thought that the main rule is not so easy to fulfill. You need to defeat an infinite number of evil spirits by combining the forces of all the conscripts. And the most important thing is that he didn't really like that according to the rules there would be zombies there. He thought that it turns out his guesses were confirmed. So he decided that he would first destroy all the bonus monsters to get a special reward. Before the battle, the night was very dark, and there was not a single celestial body in the sky as never before. The people who would have to fight in the qualifying round were nervous before this battle. People who were in the arena were walking around and complaining that someone woke them up very early because they really wanted to sleep. Others didn't understand what was happening again. They weren't allowed to sleep. A guy who offered him food approached Kim Sun and asked him what he heard, to which the young man replied that there was a great fight today. Then the guy said that he also heard, and they were told to attack immediately. First, they need to kill at least 30 pro-nicks. The young man asked him again if this was true and that they had been told this, but to himself he thought that everything was as he had expected. The homunculus entered the arena and began to shout for people to wake up because the great duel was about to begin. And then he added that their old friends would show up soon. The rules were simple. They needed to have fun with them. They had to remember that they couldn't die from beatings, and they could get a reward for murder. He also added that they will be provided with clean water and food to refresh themselves before the fights. Water did indeed come out of the drains, but it was bright red. There was a lot of water, and it flowed from all the places where there were drains, and everywhere it was bright red, the color of blood. People started shouting that it was water, water, and not rejoicing that it was raining. When they looked at their hands, they saw that the water was red, and then they started screaming that it was blood. And when did I have to discuss this event? Because the homunculus shouted in the horn, this was the beginning of the battle. They understood that the first great duel was beginning. The rules of this duel. Alchemical monsters are zombies. They need to kill enemies. This was their value. It was determined by actions. The people in the arena had no choice but to prepare themselves and take up swords, and many of them were ready to enter the battle. When they stood and waited for the enemy, they saw a green fog in front of them, behind which it was unclear what was located. But after a few seconds, they first heard a soul-tearing scream and then saw a multitude of zombies approaching them. These were the same zombies that the magicians had summoned for this qualifying round. The zombies' eyes were glowing with a bright green light. The zombies and all the people were in the arena, and from the side they were watched by the chosen ones. One of them was Kim Sun, who was the first to enter this battle. The young man watched everything that was happening below, but he did not see the zombies he needed. In his hands is the very same staff that illuminated him and which he almost threw away. The young man was looking for those bonus zombies in this crowd of zombies, which he was supposed to use to increase his rating, and he was ready to play with them. Everything was according to the rules of alchemy, just as the magician said to him. The first thing that happened was the appearance of monsters, not just monsters, but the appearance of zombies. He needed to kill enemies. Here his value is determined by his actions. It was like a battlefield before a fight, and on one side of the other, there were a lot of people, and on the other side, there were zombies. The young man went down to complete his task. He wanted to find the bonus zombie. He looked at them all and wondered where he was hiding. Turning his head to the side, he saw the same guy in the blue shirt from the chosen ones. In his hands was the staff of the spiritual wolf. The young man thought that this was a very dangerous thing in the hands of an inexperienced person. He decided that he had no other choice. Looked the other way, he saw the second of the chosen ones. This is the same guy who considered himself the main one. He attacked the zombies and cleared his way. Having destroyed several zombies, this guy said that it was time for them to get to work and moved on. The girl who was in the group of the chosen ones stood but did not attack the zombies that were in front of her. She shouted at them to go away. She demanded that they not come close to her and called them stupid zombies. He also saw a doctor who fought desperately. Despite the fact that he was missing one arm, he cut off 2 zombie heads at once. The man in glasses shouted for everyone to examine him. He shouted for everyone to fight. The chosen guy in the blue shirt activated the spiritual wolf and launched it into action. He stood looking at the staff that he had in his hands, and he really liked the effect that he got. He looked and it seemed to him simply amazing. He gave the wolves the order to kill them all. This battle was already reminiscent of a simple mess. It was unclear who was entering the battle. Wolves that were activated through the way the guy from the Chosen Ones attacked the guy in glasses, who you were fighting the zombies at that moment. This guy with glasses fell to the ground and could not get up. The girl who saw all this was very shocked. She started to get indignant about this and shouted that we should only attack zombies, we can't kill people. To which the guy who was chosen laughed and then said that he would kill all the people who stood in his way. The wolves were ready to tear apart this guy in glasses lying on the ground. But they didn't succeed because someone stopped them. He struck so that they had to retreat. It was the same girl who was outraged that the Chosen One began to fight not zombies but people. She tried to attack but felt that her strength was not enough, and so she had to defend herself. On the battlefield, all the forces were mixed together and seemed like a huge lump. The power of the wolf that was released by one of the Chosen Ones was stopped by a young man. He could not allow this power to also destroy people. The girl opened her eye and looked. She realized that she was no longer in danger. Right in front of her stood a young man who told her that Edis had gone crazy, which is why she attacked the guy and her. The guy who was with Kim Sung-chul asked him what the hell was in his hands, to which the young man said that he had received a gift from Santa yesterday. And then he added that he should watch the pastor carefully because they could be attacked from any of these sides. And so it happened the next moment on this guy on pause, but he reacted in time. This guy cut this zombie in half and sent it as far away as possible. Then this guy looked and was a little surprised. He felt absolutely nothing. Then he said, did he kill that zombie? It was very easy. The other zombies, when they heard about this, rushed towards him. Kim Sun only had time to count 26, 27, 28. He got rid of these zombies one by one. There was no more room for the young man, but he continued to move forward and destroy all the zombies that were in his way. I made another check. He realized that he had one last zombie left, and then he saw a zombie in a red cap. He was very happy. It was a bonus. The young man hurried to him so that no one would get ahead of him. This bonus zombie was huge, and he dealt with all the guys who approached him. The chosen guy in the blue shirt saw this zombie and said that it was his freak. He began to approach him and warned everyone that he would scatter those who stood in his way. Kim Sun couldn't allow this. He said that he didn't even think about it, so he also hurried forward to the zombie in the red cap, killing all the zombies in his path. The young man understood that the Chosen One shouldn't have said that because his dream was not destined to come true. He launched one of the zombie heads towards this guy. This head hit the guy right in the chest. He plowed and then began to fall back, choking. This Chosen One was not so strong that he could reach the end, and the next moment he fell to the ground. The bonus zombie remained in the fight despite the fact that a whole battle began over it. The young man told everyone to leave the bonus monster for him as he approached him. But at that moment, out of the corner of his eye, he saw that he was not alone, and there were still contenders to kill this bonus monster. He noticed that one of the girls was rushing towards the monster. She was very fast. Then the young man thought that this staff was too slow, and he would need another weapon. He activated the sword Azov. When he had his ball, he swung and threw it towards the bonus zombie so that no one could stop his shot. The girl stopped and looked at the young man. She had no choice but to give in to him. The sword was moving towards the bonus zombie at a really high speed, and it was unbearable to stop it. In just a second, this sword was right in the chest of this zombie. The young man completed this quest, and he understood that this zombie had received the first blow. The girl immediately started running towards this zombie to deliver the next blow. The young man understood that there was only one way out. He had to swing and cut off his head with one blow. Imagine his surprise that she did it as soon as he thought about it. It was strange to him that she decided to cut off his head in just one moment. He wanted to know who she was. Who is this girl who fights on the level of others, and even better than many? The girl turned her head and looked at the young man. He received a congratulation that he had defeated the bonus monster. His result was 50/50th joint kill. She also received the same message and congratulations. She also defeated the bonus monster. His reward was a palace token. He was given +3. The spiritual shield was normal, equal to the distribution. They offer a choice of rewards. The young man thought that now he would have to share the reward, and he was not satisfied with this. It was better to take the palace tokens. The girl turned her head and asked him for forgiveness. She quickly made her choice. At that moment, he was even more surprised. He certainly didn't expect that because she chose the palace tokens that he wanted to take. He had no choice. He was automatically assigned a spiritual shield. The girl turned to him, smiled, and told him that they would see each other again, and just as quickly as she appeared, she disappeared. He didn't even have time to see which side she disappeared from. She moved so quickly. He thought if she was usually a conscript, then she should have chosen an object and not some incomprehensible tokens. But it seems she knows something. The young man thought most likely she is the same as him. The day was coming to an end, and the battle that was taking place that day was also coming to an end. It was getting dark outside, and nothing was visible in the arena anymore. Only a lot of people lying on the ground. It was unclear which of them were people and which of them were zombies. The young man learned that the general award would be given depending on the rank of the palace system to distribute awards. He thought that he had not even thought about such changes. He also learned that the first great Podina has come to an end. The white square in which he is located destroyed 852 monsters, blue, red, white, black. Among all, he occupies the last fourth place. The young man was surprised because the white square always took first place, which is why he chose them without thinking for long. He also read that he had destroyed 35 monsters outside the rank. He was assigned A class, standard reward, palace tokens +2, fresh meat, 1 piece, apple +5, food, a week's supply. He understood that the rewards for the duel depend on the rank of the palace, and since the evaluation here is relative, it is allowed to kill conscripts from other palaces. He realized that as a reward, only a class with a class could at least protect him from hunger. He was offered a choice of a reward: cleansing holy water, an explosive scroll of the wind sword. He did not know what to choose. At that moment, the same guy who offered him food came up to him. He said, looking at what he had in his hand, that it was a very cool color, and asked if he had one like that too. The young man turned around and replied that no. The guy asked again if no one had advised him to choose the cleansing holy water. Kim Sung-chul replied, did he really choose this water without even considering other options, to which the guy told him that why consider it, you need to do what they say. Kim Sun didn't understand it was hard to get a reward. I protect so much with just holy water, and his choice was completely different. He chose an explosive scroll. The guy who was standing next to him was surprised. Was it really possible? He stood silently. Kim Sun told him to understand that he doesn't like to listen to other people's instructions, so he does what he wants. Kim Sung-chul thought maybe he should use the explosive scroll. It could allow him to use magic to cause a large-scale explosion. But he decided that he would not do it now because he could not get out of the water gracefully and dryly. The same guy who talked to him came up to him and told him that Kim Sol was too stressed about the rating. In fact, it turned out to be lower than him. Kim Sol was very surprised. This couldn't be because he actually had a plan and he did everything. So he demanded the tablet of records. His group destroyed 852 monsters, and the two who destroyed the most monsters were not even chosen or candidates. In the first place, there was some dog that was biting 2 monsters. It was clear that this was not a real name, but he did not know who this person was. He remembered that same girl who cut off the bonus monster's head. She was quite strong. He thought maybe it was her. This guy told Kim Sol that he was looking at it wrong because they were not at that level and they needed to go much lower. When he showed where they were on the table, the guy proudly told him to look at how many monsters he had destroyed. Kim Sol looked at the indicators and thought that everything was not so good here. Who did he think he would destroy the most on Pak Aram? He killed only 29 monsters. Oh, even time in another part, Pak Aram tried to deal with other guys. He wanted to find out who took his staff and was ready to kill anyone who was in his way. One of the chosen ones approached Pak Aram, and he stopped the young man, saying that he did not understand what was wrong with him. Pak Arak turned his head, looked at him, and continued to shout, "How dare he touch him and say anything to him?" And then he added, "If he is so impudent, then most likely it was he who took it." Then the young man turned around, swung his leg, and struck, and Pak Aram demanded that the guy return everything right now. Kim Sun thought that it seemed that Pak Aram did not receive a reward for choosing. He needed to figure out what to do next. At that moment, he heard a very quiet female voice. A girl came up to them and said hello to them. Kim Sun turned his head and looked at her, and the guy who was with him froze with his mouth open and greeted her in response. Kim Sun saw that this was a girl named Bae Sun Hee, who did not kill a single monster in this fight. She was too loving and abundant. The young man asked her what she needed. He understood that despite the fact that she survived this fight, she was in last place. The girl lowered her eyes and began to speak very quietly. Well, it was unclear what she really wanted. Kim Sun does not turn to face her, said that if she has nothing to say, then he will not stay with them, and he leaves. The girl was upset by his behavior, and she couldn't hold back and shouted for the young man to give her the staff for a short time. The guy who was present supported the girl and demanded that Kim Sun help her. Kim Sung Chol stopped, turned around, looked at her, and asked what she could give him in return. The girl didn't lose her nerve and said that she would give him anything. She just needs to get out of here and she will do everything. Her uncle is a member of the Order of Iron Blood, so she has many opportunities. Kim Sun answered her that he didn't need that. The girl didn't expect such an answer. She looked at him and didn't know what to tell him. Kim Sol also added that she should better ask the top, then raised his hand, pointed up and said, "Let them decide what they can give him." The girl didn't lose her head and took him to a very strange place. There was no one there. When they got closer to the abandoned well, she said that inside this dried-up well, there is a quest after which you can get the alchemist class, and demanded that the young man give her the staff as he promised. Kim Sun looked at her. He had to decide whether he needed this quest or not. The young man told her after he thought that he absolutely didn't need this quest and this status of an alchemist either. The girl was very outraged by his behavior, but the young man did not listen to her anymore, turned around, left, and finally said that he was good at destroying but not creating. She needed to get another hidden quest to increase her intuition. The girl tried to stop him. She shouted for him to wait and not leave. She used all her strength to stop him because she needed this staff. She said if he wants to get a quest to increase his intuition, then she will help him with this. If he copes, then he will be able to raise his intuition by 15 points. The young man couldn't even imagine that 15 points is quite a large amount for one quest. The girl stood and said that it was true. The only thing you need to do is fulfill all the conditions of this quest. She had such a face that you felt sorry for her because the young man's look spoiled her mood, and she didn't know how to prove to him that it was true. But he decided that he would go down into this abandoned well and complete this quest, which was supposed to raise his intuition by 15 points. He handed the girl a staff and told her to hold it, but if she collected it and he didn't find the quest, she would die. Immediately after that, he jumped inside this abandoned well in order to complete the quest. The well wasn't very deep, so he soon landed at the bottom. The young man stood at the very bottom of the well. He raised his head up to see how deep he had jumped. At the bottom of the well, there was indeed a quest hidden, and he was given the conditions. It was a miracle and the epic's traces of the 8th hero Eckhart. Then he was greeted that he got into the world of alchemy. The young man was very upset because he assumed but still thought that she would not deceive him. The 8th hero Eckhart, he heard about him for the first time because he knew, like everyone else, only about 7 heroes. He realized that she had fooled him. Immediately after these words, it appeared on the table that he could not insult the 8th hero, and his intuition was reduced by 1 point. The young man was angry. He was so angry that he was ready to destroy everything around him because he did not understand how this quest could dare to touch his intuition. Despite this, he was told that the spirit of the 8th hero will never die. The young man told him that he quickly returned this 1 point to him before he tore it to pieces. The scoreboard showed him have mercy, and 1 intuition returned. After all this, he had some kind of bad impression about this quest and everything that had just happened. So he decided that he would not do such quests on the quest tables. There was disappointment. But then the young man saw what was being offered to him, and he thought about it. He read that the last test of the true hero Eckhart, he can get intuition from +1 to +10 study of the ancient heritage. When fulfilling a special condition, he will receive a familiar. He was a little unhappy because the girl told him a +15 intuition is now in the quest. He was asked how much he thought he would get for completing this quest. The young man replied that he would get 20 points. They started bargaining with him and offering him 12 points for passing, then 14. He didn't agree and said that he was leaving. And when he was almost ready to go back, they offered him 15 points because they couldn't give him more. The young man said that he agreed only so that later there would be no excuses. Otherwise, he would simply kill them all. A sign appeared in front of him. The miracle of the era admires his strong will and welcomes the one who answered Eckhart's final test. The young man thought that this quest very quickly understands what is what, and it managed to interest him. It was clear that the person who created everything in this quest made it more interesting than he even thought. The young man approached the door and swung his hammer to destroy this door. The door that was blocking his way was destroyed. He could move on, so the quest. He decided that this alchemy quest was much more interesting than he thought, and the reward was really big. When the young man entered this room, it was all in dust. It was clear that no one had been here for a long time. In front of him was the alchemist's workplace. On the table were two bottles, one was green, the other was lilac. These bottles in his hands he received a message that he felt the great power of Eckhart's legacy, and his intuition increased by another point. The young man wondered if this was all too simple. He didn't believe it, but the window display showed the competition. Was he really unhappy again? The young man became even more angry and punched the window. He warned the competition that he was ready to tear them apart. Then he added that they simply had nothing more to say. And this impudent window competition, this moment, it highlighted that the great legacy of the eighth hero noticed his young man did not understand what it was. It was revealed to him that the first test had come, and he had to prove his abilities as an alchemist. In front of him stood a huge creature that was protected by metal shields, and only one eye was burning. When the young man saw this creature, he thought about it. At that moment, he realized that he could still get points in this quest. When this robot-like creature came closer, it was no longer so huge and not so scary. The only thing it demanded was that he prove his abilities. The young man thought that if they were asking him to really prove it, it would have cost him nothing to throw the two vials he had in his hands at this iron creature. When he did this, and these two bottles hit the top of this creature, the bottles broke and mixed together. The creature began to burn and its shell began to crack. The young man looked at everything that was happening and did not understand what had happened to him. This metal creature, a gorilla, was smoking before his eyes. Eventually, this creature was torn into small pieces. It was destroyed on the board showed that he destroyed the magic golem, and in him, the hidden talents of an alchemist were revealed, and his reward was +1 intuition, a scroll about changing the class to an alchemist. The young man thought that they were talking some nonsense about some talents there, because in reality, they were just putting on a show here. When he got closer to this creature that crumbled right in front of him, he saw that there was a glowing object inside. Kim-sun took it in his hands and began to examine it carefully. Then he realized that it was a whole core. He thought if this core was created by that same Eckhart, maybe he was not bad, and he decided to go through this quest further. The young man walked further and found himself in a room in the middle of which stood a multifaceted table on which a display was illuminated. This signboard said that the young man needed to place a class change scroll on the altar to receive the title of alchemist. Then he thought if this is a real altar as it is written here, then it was not a joke. Now it was clear to him that in order to go further, he needed to first become an alchemist. He read that only those who possessed the true abilities of an alchemist could receive powers and tests here. He thought that this was some kind of kindergarten, and this quest seemed very strange to him. Taking a step forward, he felt some kind of field in front of him. Having passed through this field, he was very surprised. He was not prepared to see such a thing. In front of him was a room of sharp metal spears that stuck out from both the floor and the ceiling. The young man got angry and thought that this is how the quest treats him, so he will simply smash everything to hell. Then he decided that he would always have time to do this, and now it would be better for him to have fun pretending that he was caught. He used the scroll to change class to alchemist. Well, in order to activate the alchemist, he needed 20 tokens, and he wasn't quite ready to use it. But he had already decided that he would do it, so he used the scroll and 20 tokens. He felt the breath and truth. He was congratulated. He received the hidden eye by the alchemist. Kim-sun was not entirely happy with this quest and was even very irritated. That's why he told the board that was constantly displaying some messages to stop constantly buzzing over the spirit. The board showed that the main class was a beginner warrior, and the additional class was a high-ranking cook, a rare alchemist. Then he read that now it was time for a real test, and they invited him as an alchemist. He was interested in what would happen next. If nothing special happened, then he would kill everyone. He walked further down the long dark corridor and came to the next room, where in the middle of the room stood a huge cauldron. The young man, when he saw this cauldron, thought what it was, but then he raised his head and was even more surprised. There was something incomprehensible before his eyes. It seemed to be held by many cobwebs, and it resembled metal armor. When he came closer, the first test of the eighth hero Eckhart was highlighted to him. It consisted mainly of the alchemist's skill in creation. He needed to combine the ingredients that lay on the table and create an object that could free the golem. If he freed him, he would pass the test. He was given 10 minutes. When he read the terms of this quest to the end, the fire lit up and began to warm up this huge cauldron. The young man was not quite ready for such a turn of events, but he decided that he would go to the end and turned his head. And I saw that there was information about natural components here. This is the base of the alchemist's skill. There were lava butterfly wings, river stone, grass for the blind, and purified water. He knew that water purified from impurities is suitable for creating alloys. The young man thought that he should throw everything into one cauldron, and he would cope with this task. First, he poured purified water into this cauldron. Then he looked and thought what he should throw next. He decided that he would throw a river stone. It was a stone that can often be seen on the riverbank. It had no effect. Taking this stone, he poured it into the water that was already in this cauldron. The next thing he decided to add was the wings of a lava butterfly. It also had no effect, but the right wing of the lava butterfly had the properties of fire. It melts weak substances. At some point, he even thought that the color that was inside the cauldron didn't match each other, and most likely that's why the smoke started. The young man was not going to stop, and he decided that he should add the grass for the blind, which was often found on the riverbank, had the property of slowing down. Therefore, it neutralizes the alchemical elements that are opposite to each other. He did not know, but decided that he just needed to throw everything at once. There was so much grass that it barely fit into the cauldron. It was unclear what would come out of all this. The young man reassured himself that he had so much mana, and that was why no one liked this class. He tried hard to prevent everything he had hammered. The board showed that Ekkar's heirs were delighted with his courage, the speed of making the substance. He definitely has the same extraordinary abilities as the eighth hero. He got a bright pink mixture. When he took this potion in his hands, he thought, did he really succeed? Does it mean he really has abilities? He sprinkled a little of this potion on the flasks, thinking that he needed to use it to melt the web. But nothing happened to the web. He didn't understand what was going on. It was the same as before. It just changed its color. The window lit up in front and said if he thinks that everything is so simple, then he is deeply mistaken. Well, as always, she laughed at him. There were 30 seconds left until the end of this quest. In order to melt the web, a solution of a higher rank is needed, and the path to the truth requires an extraordinary mindset. Here, anyone who does not have the ability must return back. The research inscription he saw is that he should leave because he is not capable of anything. The young man heard laughter from all sides. Laughter at him, he said. They just asked him to test his strength. Did they really want this? He couldn't imagine that they could do exactly that to him, taking away 20 tokens from him to get the alchemist. Kim-sun was so angry that he couldn't hold back. He swung his fist and hit the web with all his might, and the scoreboard showed that there were 15 seconds left. The young man grabbed the web and began to move away from this place, pulling it behind him. Kim-sun ran away and screamed loudly. He knew that he could destroy everything here. He still had time, so he ran at a very high speed, stretching this web as tightly as possible. He ran out of this room and ran into another one. He was heading towards the exit. He was wondering how much time he had left. If he destroyed the legacy of the eighth hero, then everything would end. The board showed that the problem was in the last test. He needed to destroy the strongest three-headed golem using the alchemist skills he had acquired. The young man, when I heard about the last test, he said if this is the last one, then he is ready for it, but he has a condition for this. He acted in his usual way, taking out his huge weapon with which he was ready to destroy everything around him. The young man shouted that the last test is always the easiest no matter what. And so it happened. This old abandoned well was smashed to smithereens in a matter of minutes. Kim-sun stood at the bottom of this well, looked up. All that was left was to rise up. But first he needed to figure out the reward for this quest. Therefore, he demanded his reward since the quest was completed to the very end. The window wrote that he deceived him, but the young man knew from the very beginning that he would win this quest and get his own. He passed the last test of the eighth hero and proved that he is a great alchemist. After passing all the tests, he receives relics. Kim-sun, when he saw that he was getting a relic, he thought that this was already a better reward. The Book of the Magician, the living book of Bertelgi. I am a portable alchemical furnace and plus 11 intuition. The quest he went through was unhappy that he was able to do this and told the young man that he was a dirty liar. But despite this, he received his rewards and 11 intuition points. Now he could go back and continue with everyone else. The young man turned his head and heard a voice that told him that he would say something that no one had told him. It was a girl who thought that he was a dirty liar. This girl came from that very book. She thought it was terrible that her master was such a person. The young man asked who she was. The girl replied that her name was Bertelja and that she was a living book that he received as a reward. Kim-sun asked her what she could do. He didn't want to hear her opinion at all. The girl replied that he had a very bad manner of speech and that he did not know how to speak like a woman at all. Then she added that she did not expect such a dirty deceiver to ask for a test of strength. She added that inside it is contained knowledge of alchemy left to the chief alchemist, the eighth hero, Eckhart. The young man came closer to the book and tried to read it. The girl barely managed to grab the book. She told him if he wanted to find something, then just let him say she would open the right page herself. He wanted her to say it was possible to remove the curse of destruction. The girl replied that there is no such thing. Eckhart himself could not do it, so she does not know how to do it. The young man was very upset and he understood everything, and this book was not very useful for him. Then he asked this girl what kind of book it was that he had in his hand, because in 25 years of living in this world, he had never heard of such a thing. The Book of the Magician had the effect of obtaining the class of the magician. You need to find your beloved daughter and guide her on the path of truth. It seemed to him that this was a very stupid condition, and Akara's daughter had already died a long time ago. He decided that he didn't need the magician's book, and he could send it to storage. The girl was indignant, saying that he was wrong, and Ekkar's daughter had not died at all. And in front of him, the young man shook his head and asked where. So when she couldn't stand it any longer and replied that she was Ekkar's daughter, Bertelja smiled at him. The young man couldn't stand it and abruptly slammed the book shut, leaving the girl inside the book. She was very indignant and shouted that he was an ordinary bastard. He decided that this book should be sent to him too, the storage. The young man thought that this eighth hero was quite funny, and if he needed it, he would use it later. Time passed and he decided that he should go to everyone else. He shouldn't stand out. When he returned, he received another message from the magician he spared. This message said that the rules of Pac-Man were changed, and that's why the tests were the hardest level. In his hands were the rules of the next rating fight, and they were determined by the rules: first place 100%, second place 80, and so on. If he does not give a bribe, then he will no longer receive a message. The young man wondered if the connection between the white square and the Order of the Iron Blood could be broken at that moment. He definitely didn't want that. He saw that the prize for first place was almost twice as big as that of the last place. And if he was unlucky with the Order of the Palace tokens, there would be almost none left. He could not allow this to happen. Having let go of the messenger from the magician, he understood that this was a warning, and it could mean that problems could arise with the acquisition of magical power. After thinking for a while, he decided that he had to use all means to take first place. He was at the top and looked at everyone else who was below. You were burning the corpses of the dead there at that moment. There were a lot of them. Kim Sun knew perfectly well that he could not interfere with the course of the next battle, but he needed some kind of plan, and he decided to first deal with the selected candidates who were closest. There wasn't much time left until the next qualifying battle, so he had to not waste it. He headed towards the rest of the Chosen Ones to see who he would have to fight first. When he came to the rest of the Chosen Ones, he realized that all the guys were showing interest in Bei Song He, but she didn't have the cleansing holy water. They all wanted to pretend that they were there for this girl, but something had to be done to make them follow him with ease. After thinking for a while, he decided that he could attract their attention to himself and started talking about 10,000 swings of the ball. That each exercise is 1,000 times, and they all need to gallop around the area of 1,000 circles, because hunting for low and mid-level monsters in the forest. All the other guys actually paid attention to him and listened carefully to everything he said. The only Pak Aram was outraged because he came only because of her and did not intend to train at all. The young man thought that this guy was here only because of her. He immediately gave himself away. The girl turned sharply and pushed Pak Aram away from her. She told him not to come near her and not to touch her. Pak Aram was indignant because she began to pretend that she was not a woman. If it weren't for another world, he wouldn't have looked at someone like her. One of the guys couldn't take it anymore and hit him and told him to shut up. Pak Aram didn't even have time to put up a defense and got hit on the jaw. The girl asked the guy to stop. Kim Sun did nothing. He watched what was happening. The guys almost killed each other. One of them told them to stop and put an end to this carnage. Pak Aram didn't understand how this idiot could hit him because he considered himself untouchable. But the guy who did it thought he was absolutely right and was ready to fight him. Pak Aram was not prepared for such a turn of events. He said that they were all freaks. Then he added that they would regret it, turned around and ran away from them very quickly. Kim Sun knew that this guy in a blue shirt should not be ignored, but he came here for something completely different. First, he needed to get busy preparing for the battle. They headed to the training ground and started training. All the Chosen Ones were present there. The young man struck blow after blow at the dummy and said he was down to his last 1,000. Everyone else was very surprised because they were already exhausted, and the only one who was not tired at all was Kim Sun. The young man said if they could complete the entire training session without lagging behind him, he would give them a gingerbread man. At this time, he was going to form the Kim Hak Chul gang, which was engaged in hunting monsters in the forest. The guy with glasses said that he understood everything, but he didn't understand who would do it. Kim Sun didn't understand why he said no. Then the guy with glasses tried to explain to him that it was too hard and that everyone present there couldn't handle it. They had very little food left, and he didn't know who would agree to participate in this. They understood perfectly well that the knife they would have to carry was heavier than these guys could handle, although they had guessed it. Then he said that he understood everything perfectly well, but it wouldn't change anything. But despite this, they would have to decide. The guy in glasses agreed with every word he said. He understood that it would not be easy, and he felt sorry for some of them because they would have to be excluded. The guy with glasses said that it was time for the young man to leave, otherwise he would see real hell. Kim Sun did so and went to the next gang of Jong-Jong-sik. He made them the same offer. The leader of the gang said, if they agree, then they will be able to raise their points. Unlike the previous gang, it existed only for the sake of profit and power. Kim Sun answered him that he understood everything absolutely correctly. They will raise the power of agility and health all the way up to 25 points. The gang leader said that his guys have an average of 10-12 points, which means that if they sweat a little, they can become almost twice as strong. The young man understood that he had to take the bait of such an offer, and he thought very quickly. The gang leader said that he now has 24 power points. If he is lying, he will skin him. Kim Sun even became interested in whether he could really remove his skin, and he thought maybe he should play it once to see how it would look. The leader of this gang was serious and wanted to show how strong he was. The next moment, he threw his well-sharpened dagger so that it flew past the young man. Kim Sun was prepared for such a turn of events and was not at all afraid of his threat. It was quite dangerous, but sometimes such guys were needed. The dagger flew past the young man and hit the guy who was standing near their food straight in the head. The gang leader looked at the guy he had just killed and smiled. Kim Sun looked at the gang leader and wondered why he looked so much like him. The gang leader shouted for everyone to gather. The young man saw that they were all in excellent condition. When the raiding battle ends, the summoning area will be filled with blood. The gang leader said that now the hellish training begins. Evening came and everyone was hungry after this long day. Kim Sun decided to show off his culinary skills and prepared food for everyone. The guys from the select group were very surprised because in front of them lay a huge piece of meat that they had not eaten for a long time. After he had prepared all this and served them at the table, the man said that only now could they eat. She wished them a pleasant appetite. The chosen ones began to talk among themselves that they had not eaten meat for a long time and that this meat had an excellent smell. One of the guys approached the girl and told her to try what was in his hands. She thanked him. Kim Sun was watching everything that was happening from the side. He couldn't miss anything. This couple stood and talked to each other. She told him a big thank you for the last time and he responded and smiled. Pak Aram was watching them all. Kim Sun, despite the fact that the guy in the blue shirt was trying to go unnoticed, he immediately saw him. Now it was necessary to understand what this Pak Aram had in mind. He should not have lost sight of him. In fact, the preparation for tomorrow's battle was finished no matter what anyone had plans. But if someone interfered with him, Kim Sun thought, he was ready to strangle him. The next morning came and it was the beginning of the raiding battle. This battle should be very cruel and monstrous. Everyone who was in the arena received a message about the rules of this battle. It said that they should not evade pursuit for 1 hour, and if they can destroy there and there, then they will not fulfill the conditions of the battle and will win naturally if they only succeed. The young man knew that there they kill people for entertainment. For those called, he is the most dangerous creature, but not this time. The girl called Kim Sun. She wanted to say something. When she came closer, she said that she didn't see the guy she was talking to yesterday. The young man asked her again if Ha Yeonjong had really disappeared. It was very unexpected, but he didn't have time for this guy. The very next moment, a crash was heard as one of the doors to the arena fell. She didn't just fall, she was knocked out and thrown aside. Immediately after this door was knocked down, a huge hand appeared. And then you could hear the breathing of this monster who was about to enter the arena. He resembled a huge gorilla, only many times larger. This monster was so huge that when everyone saw it, they froze for a moment, realizing that they would not be able to fight it. The girl was very worried and was looking for Yeonjong. She didn't know where he was and didn't understand why he wasn't among them. Kim Sung-chol looked first in one direction, then turned his head and looked in the other direction, but he also did not see Ha Peng-jung. He thought the guy had disappeared, and even more so, he had no time for him because he had a real opponent. Everyone else stood waiting to see what would happen next. He turned and saw that the Chosen Ones had also appeared on the battlefield. The crowd of the Chosen Ones stood apart from everyone else, and none of them had weapons. Among this crowd of the Chosen Ones was Pak Aram, The young man did not understand what he was doing here. And the most important thing was that it was unclear what he had in his hands. He was holding a bottle of liquid. When the gate to this site fell with a very loud crash, so loud that the ground shook underfoot, Kim Sun turned his head and looked and said that this is the beginning of this objection. Since it was deep night outside and there was practically no lighting, all the subjects immediately saw their huge opponent, a monster with glowing red eyes. The gang leader, the same guy with glasses, told his men to run away from that place as quickly as possible. The boys were so scared that they started running away without hesitation because their opponent was just huge. I understand that they won't be able to do anything with him. All the subjects rushed to run away as quickly as possible, but this monster stretched out its paw to grab them. And he succeeded. He grabbed quite a large number of guys in his huge paw. They screamed for someone to help them. Others just fell. This monster captured them only to eat them. The more small people he catches, the more he will remove his appetite. The next moment, everyone he had captured with his paw was already in his mouth. He was ready to swallow them. Another gang asked their commander what to do. They doubted their abilities. They said that this monster is the strongest in history. Their commander told them to scatter in all directions, and they had to try to stay alive until the end of this mission. On the battlefield, no one knew what to do. Everyone tried to run as far as possible from this monster, including Kim Sun. He told the others that they first needed to get to shelter as quickly as possible. He didn't have time to explain. This monster, seeing that everyone was running away from him as far as possible, jumped up and blocked their path. When he landed, the ground on this site shook. This monster landed right in the middle, splitting all the subjects into two parts. The guy who was the main one among the chosen ones told all the other chosen ones that now they should prepare themselves. He pulled out a bottle with some liquid. The monster roared wildly and grabbed everyone in a row. Everything irritated him. And the chosen ones opened vials of purified holy water and sprinkled it in his direction, each in front of them. The monster was furious at their impudence and the way they were behaving towards him. The chosen ones, due to the fact that they used purified holy water, created a protective field around themselves, behind which they hid. The monsters tried to approach the chosen ones, but the protective field did not give him. The guy who was the main one among the chosen ones told the monster that he could get lost. The monsters had no choice but to retreat, but the most cowardly of all the chosen ones was Pak Aram. He ran away as far as possible, even before the chosen ones found themselves under the protective field. Even time Armuk Bakr, commander of the Stormfront Alliance Corps, lay on his bed and said that White Square was unlucky, not only that in the second battle, the rules of Pac-Man apply, and also Tam Tama ran into Ma Sangil, the senior commander of the Iron Blood Order, watching everything that was happening, believed that these Chu-Yu conscripts were openly trying to exterminate their Iron Blood Order. He thought maybe he could pay them for it. Then he decided that he should leave, and he didn't want to watch this anymore. He told the room that he wanted to have a good time. The commander of the Iron Blood Order demanded that Dolrance Winterler come to him immediately. Since she was a magician and could move in space, she also appeared right in front of him. The magician lowered his head and asked him if he had called her and for what reason. The commander of the Iron Blood Order said that it seemed to him that after Pak Aram failed to obtain the sacred water from her, there were no more reports. The mage replied that he had nothing to worry about. Her ward had already obtained the sacred water. Then the commander said that as far as he knows, it is called the blessing of the god of order, which cannot be made with magic. It is unclear how he was able to obtain it. The magician answered him that it was necessary to sacrifice the minority for the sake of the majority. Her ward simply followed the laws of the Order of Iron Blood. On the field where the qualifying battle was taking place, one of the guys was shouting that he had managed to survive at great cost. He wanted to live, but he was already in the monster's mouth despite the fact that the guy was screaming that he didn't want to die. No one heard him. Kim Sun stood and watched everything that was happening. He understood that already 60 people fell into the mouth of this monster. It was unclear how much longer they had to hide. Kim Sun told the others that they needed to be in a safe place until he was full. The others wanted to know what would happen when he was full. The young man said that in his opinion, this monster needs to eat another 30 people. When everyone was standing and hiding as far away from this monster as possible, they saw Pak Aram approaching him. It seemed that Pak Aram was absolutely calm and ready to fight this monster. The chosen one, Pak Aram, swung the ball he had in his hand and tried to attack this monster. The guy shouted that it was a disgusting macaque and he wasn't afraid of it at all. He threw the sword towards the monster. The sword he threw struck those all the way to his head and hit it, but did not cause any damage to the monster. The monster just got angry, turned its head and opened its mouth, growling very loudly. Pak Aram stood below and shouted that he was in front of him. He called the monster a stupid creature and drew attention to himself. This monster turned around and headed towards Pak Aram because he had made him very angry. None of the guys understood what was going on and why Pak Aram was trying to lure him in that direction. Kim Sun then realized that this was Pak Aram's plan, but he shouldn't have interfered with his plan. Pak Aram stood right in front of this monster. In his hands was a bottle of sacred water. Since Pak Aram himself did not receive this sacred water, he stole it from someone, and most likely this is Yanzhong's sacred water. The guy opened the cap of this bottle and splashed this sacred water right on the monster and around it. Kim Sun told the guys who were standing with him that they should act according to the plan. When he gave the signal, they should run as they had trained. Pak Aram splashed this sacred water around herself. He acted according to his plan. This monster was very frightened by the action of this water and immediately jumped back and landed near him. Pak Aram, with the help of this sacred water, subdued this monster and ordered it to destroy all the others who were with Kim Sun. Kim Sun understood that everything was going according to plan, and he ordered his guys to scatter. When this monster tried to catch up with them, it did not understand which way to move. So it decided that it needed to go after one of these guys, and the monster chose Kim Sun. Pak Aram was already celebrating his victory. He wanted to see how long these guys could last. Kim Sun. Before the video of his actions, he just didn't teach that they also have sacred water. The monster was furious and needed to catch up and get at least one victim. He roared like thunder, trying to scare everyone around him. Despite everything went like clockwork and everything went according to the plan that Kim Sun had planned. The monster moved towards him. When the young man was very close to this monster, he understood that it would soon begin. He gave the order for everyone else to take up position, each with their own task. The monster did not understand what was happening and acted like an animal. It growled and demolished everything in its path. It tried to grab the young man with its huge paws, but it didn't work because Kim Sun was fast enough. When he was able to move to a safe distance, he activated one of his abilities. The monster was very close and he couldn't hesitate. He had to act. The young man took out a scroll and cast a spell. It was an explosive scroll. He needed to read the spell from this scroll as quickly as possible to destroy this creature. The very next moment, everyone saw how the fire was moving towards this monster, and it was plunging this monster more and more into the fire from all sides. The young man read the Research Institute of Explosive Scroll to the end. The fire was so strong that the scroll itself almost turned to ashes. The fire completely captured this monster from all sides, and it began to roar in pain. This monster could do nothing. It only growled loudly. Its fur burned with a bright flame. The guys who were in the arena started talking among themselves that this monster had caught fire. No one understood what was happening and what was going on. There was very thick smoke. Kim Sun took out his dagger. He thought that he shouldn't miss such a good moment while nothing could be seen because of the smoke. He approached the monster and dealt him many blows so that blood spurted in all directions. When Russia began to smoke, everyone saw how this monster was bleeding. In the case of such a huge monster as Tam Tam, the most effective thing would be to cut off the housing, which is what the young man did. Everyone started shouting that the monster had fallen, and it really had fallen. Kim Sun's childhood, according to plan, he foresaw all the circumstances, and he managed to pass this test. When the smoke began to clear, they saw that the leader of one of the gangs was located very close to this monster. This guy came closer to this monster and cut all its tendons, probably so that this monster would fall completely. And when this monster fell, the ground in this arena shook because he was so huge. The leader of the gang asked everyone else if they would be the only ones, and if they were to hesitate, then he would eat them all alone. The leader of the second gang told his people that they were ready to help him too, and ordered them to attack. When this helpless monster lay on the ground, it was clear that altogether they would not be able to defeat him. They shouted that they needed to catch this monkey and tear it to pieces. Kim Sun understood that the deed had already been done, and now everyone else would finish the job so that this monster would no longer exist. The only thing everyone needed to know was that his skin couldn't be pierced with a sword, and they had to aim instead of wounding him in order to cause even more damage. This monster tried with all her might to save herself. It rose up and began to roar loudly from the pain it felt, but he no longer had a chance. Everything went according to plan, as the young man had expected. This monster was also damaged once more and hit right in the eye. At that moment, an explosion occurred inside it. Everyone was ready. They could continue to damage him at any moment. Kim Sun was pleased with himself and the guys with whom he was able to cope with this huge monster. There was an explosion on the site. The monster no longer existed. They received congratulations that they had destroyed Tam Tam. The achievement turned out to be much greater than the challenge, and they received a top-level reward regardless of the points they had. Everyone read the messages and were happy that they killed him and they won. The girl looked at her achievements and saw that her contribution was 0.3%. It seemed to her that this was very little. The young man thought that there were still 2 rating battles left, and he needed to collect 23 tokens. His individual reward depended on the size of the contribution. His contribution was 18.4%, comma. This was a reward with a rank. Of course, he knew that everyone's reward would be different. But I didn't understand why the white horse took first place in the Mortal Kombat. It would be nice to have an additional weapon. Some were shown a reward for their contribution, a whip and a scorpion's tail. The standard reward is 14 palace tokens fresh meat, 3 pieces apples, 15 pieces provisions for a week, a reward of your choice holy water for exorcism, 5 pieces warrior's crossbow or madness potion. Kim-sun looked at the chosen ones and understood that they should have guessed earlier that they would not get anything. They would light up the water. The other guys started telling them that while they were sweating, the chosen ones were having fun, and now they got what they deserved. Pak Aram got angry and tried to pounce on the main one of the chosen ones. He did not understand what it meant that there was no reward, and where had he seen such a thing? He ran like crazy. Kim-sung approached the young man in the shirt and asked him what he did to Ha-yeon-jun. The guy turned around and asked if they really wanted to know where Pr-jun had gone. The chief among the chosen ones said that he does not even know where he could have gone and what could have happened to him. Kim-sun knew perfectly well that he was definitely hiding something, but his hungry mouth would not be able to hold back when there was food in front of him. So he handed him 2 apples and said that this would be enough in exchange for information. The guy replied that he wouldn't give up his own for 2 apples. Then the young man reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and asked how about this. He took out the highest quality dried meat that was lying in his jacket. Kim-sun held a piece of meat in one hand and said that for this piece, he should answer his question. The guy was drooling. When the young man found out what happened to Yeon-jun, he wanted to understand why he came there and right before the rating battle, and also as the director. He really wanted to go inside, but it seemed to him that there was no one inside. Kim-sun didn't think long because he had no choice but to go and have a look. Everything looked quite suspicious and incomprehensible to the young man. When he went inside, at the end of a long corridor, he saw someone's body. He hurried to look. Kim-sun didn't wait and ran to the side where it seemed to him that the body was lying. Having run up, he stopped. Now everything became clear to him. It really was a body. Ha-yeon-jun was lying bloody on the floor. The guy was not moving. It was clear that he was dead. There was wolf fur around him, but wolves don't come here because of the monsters, so magic was used here. The homunculus went to another part and said that he was quite successful, but people really annoyed him just because they got everything mixed up. This homunculus approached the very place where Kim-sun was. He was very surprised to meet a stranger here. He asked what he was doing here. The young man told him that he had dragged a cart to load the body into it. Homunculus asked the man. He says so because he has already seen everything, and if this is so, then he is also ready to die and attacked him. Kim-sun grabbed this homunculus by the throat and lifted him up. He wanted to know who killed Yeon-jun. The homunculus began to say that he was just a homunculus and that he knew nothing. He begged to be let go. The young man asked him again who killed Yeon-jun. The young man's hand squeezed the homunculus's throat more and more tightly. A little more, and he would have nothing to breathe. The homunculus could not stand it and shouted that it was Pak Aram. The young man was outraged because Pak Aram with such points could not kill Ha-yeon-jun. The homunculus began to shout that the young man does not understand anything, and Pak Aram is an ordinary werewolf, and if he does not believe, then he should see the main one himself as covering for him. Kim-sun put it in its place. Now it became clear to him why the wolf's fur was near the guy's body. The homunculus bowed to the young man for giving him life and said that now he would be his slave and would serve him until the end of his life. Kim-sun seemed to dissolve and began to turn into his real self. He asked the homunculus if he remembered him. The homunculus looked and couldn't understand, but he had definitely seen it already. Then the young man said that they had already met him at the conscription square 25 years ago. The homunculus looked at him and was shocked. Could it really be that he was the enemy of the world? He was very sorry that he did not die. Kim-sun grabbed the homunculus by the leg so that he couldn't move it, and he told him that it wasn't that he wasn't dead, but he picked him up and swung his arm to hit him on the ground. And then he added that he simply didn't have time to kill them and threw him as far away as possible. The homunculus flew away because it was thrown with such great force. It was visible how the homunculus was flying very far and asking for help. Now everything became clear to the young man. Pak Aram became a werewolf. It was unexpected but quite funny. In the square where the battle had just taken place, the guys gathered and wanted to sort things out. There were quite a lot of dead guys on the ground. They were already lying lifeless. The others looked at them and thought that they too could have been in their place. There were two groups in the square. The leader of one group told the other that his people had lost all fear and had taken for themselves what belonged to his comrades. Then he demanded that he pay for it. He was only interested in one question: how would he do it? The second head of the group was also indignant that no matter how you look at it, how could you do something like that? The guy with the mohawk told him that he didn't realize that it was a pity for the creatures who didn't lift a finger and now want to appropriate someone else's. He stood up and began his speech by saying that those who fought must sacrifice their lives and they do not want to starve, and those others are dirty ragamuffins and creatures. He said that from that day on, this square is his. The rest of the guys supported his decisions. He said if someone doesn't like it, then let them attack. He is ready to respond. The head of the chosen ones told him that he was a stupid freak and that he shouldn't worry because everyone else was shouting for the chosen ones to get out of the square, that no one needed them anymore. Pak Aram stepped forward and said that they shouldn't fight because love should save the world. He raised his hands up so that everyone would pay attention to him. He came closer to the guy who had Erikez put his hand on his shoulder and told him to cool down because he was wrong. His words really hurt the gang leader. He wasn't going to tolerate that. So he hit his ball to knock away the hand of this chosen guy and told him not to touch him again. Pak Aram stood in front of him holding his injured hand. He was very angry. The guy with the mohawk told him to get lost while he was being nice to them. Otherwise, next time he'd take their head off. Pak Aram demonstratively licked the blood that was on his hand with his tongue and said that he was not at all accommodating because he wanted the best. And the next moment he said what he would do and said if he saw this, he would turn into a werewolf. Everyone who was in this square was very surprised. They could not even imagine that there was a monster in front of them. Pak Aram no longer had a human appearance but was turning into a wolf. His legs became paws. And when he already had a non-human appearance, he asked everyone if in this case they would not be able to become friends. In the middle of the square, in front of everyone else, stood a huge werewolf, and no one understood what to do. Everyone was whispering among themselves what the hell this guy turned into a monster in an instant. Kim's son watched everything that was happening. What happened confirmed his assumption. The huge werewolf asked the guy how he had cooled down a bit, and if he wanted to present him with anything else. The werewolf said, can he really control his anger now? When he saw him like that, no matter how strong this guy was, he wouldn't be able to handle the werewolf. Jong Sik wasn't going to give up. He was ready to fight this werewolf. For this, he prepared himself. The guys from his gang stood in front of him and said that they would take this UBO on themselves, and he should step aside. The werewolf felt his strength. He understood that some people could not resist him under any circumstances. The werewolf swung and with one blow destroyed two guys who tried to resist him. He understood that they could not stop him. Jong Sik already understood that in front of him was a werewolf who was ready to destroy such people. The werewolf then asked the guy what he would say in such a case when he was ready to kill him with one sign of his paw. Everyone else stood and was silent. They had nothing to say and not everyone was afraid to say a word. Kim-sun silently watched what was happening. He understood that it was given to him as a reward, and he still did not know how to use it. The magician who supervised Pak Aram suddenly appeared on this square and ordered her protege to stop. The werewolf immediately stopped because he couldn't resist. The magician told him that there were too many people here. He had to stop, otherwise he would be punished in the next trials. Pak Aram, in the body of a werewolf, made her realize that he didn't give a damn about anything she said, and he wasn't going to listen to her. Jong Sik exhaled. He didn't know who it was, but he understood that she saved him. He decided that he should disappear as quickly as possible. The werewolf continued to argue with the magician. He told her that if she wanted to please his father, she should deal with them all herself. Then he decided that she shouldn't be listened to because everyone was annoying him today, and he left after the guy with the mohawk. There was only a short distance left and the werewolf almost caught up with the guy. But at that moment, everything went wrong. Someone used a staff and directed the wolves towards the werewolf. One of these wolves bit the werewolf on the hind leg in order to stop him. The werewolf could not move any further and instantly fell to the ground. Pak Aram, in the form of a werewolf, fell to the ground, wanted to know what kind of freak it was who did this to him. Kim-sun thought he didn't know who did it, but the timing was perfect. This spirit wolf was able to stop the werewolf and not let him move any further. The spirit wolf not only dealt damage to him from behind, but also attacked him from the front. The spirit wolf damaged the werewolf by biting him on one shoulder so that he could not move further. The werewolf growled in pain so much that everyone around him started to tremble. And in the next moment, this werewolf became smaller and smaller, and then took on the appearance of a man again. He became Pak Aram, who had a wound on his shoulder and blood was flowing from it. The guy immediately fell to his knees from this pain and then got on all fours. He was pierced by unbearable pain. Pak Aram didn't understand what kind of idiot dared to attack him with his own staff. The werewolf's transformation time was 5 minutes, but that was enough to conquer the area. Kim-sun, seeing what was happening now, he had to understand who this was, who Pak Aram had just attacked, who this spiritual wolf was. Looking around, he saw a familiar face that he had already met once here on the square. He was very surprised that this girl was the same girl, but he did not understand why she was protecting Pak Aram's people. She had a staff in her hands. She knew about the summoning palace. He wondered if she had also returned to the past. After some time, he received a new message from the magician via an ordinary messenger. Now he knew that she was from Erfurt. It was a good place. He was given information about Dolrance Winter that she graduated from the freezing school, the magic academy in Erfurt. And at the moment, day and night, she watches Pak Aram, but there is one moment when she does not watch him when he goes into the forest with girls. Kim-sun looked around and did not see where that idiot had gone, where Pak Aram was. The note said that he was going into the forest with a girl right now, and it was a great message and a great day to die for Pak Aram. The girl was sitting on the ground. She was strong, scared, shaking from fear and asking to be spared. She had no shoes on one leg. In front of her stood a man of black Monty, and on his head was a hood. His face was not visible. This man said that when they ask for mercy like that, then he has an even greater desire to kill them before. He took off his hood and the girl saw a werewolf in front of her who was drooling. The magician was indignant about what had started again. It was unclear how she could stop this creature. Everyone thought that he was normal because his father was the commander of the Order of Iron Blood. The magician watched the actions of her ward and said that even in other places it is difficult to meet bastards like him under the picked-up ones. Everyone understood that it was not easy for her at all. Her assistants tried to calm her down, that there were only 2 raiding fights left and she needed to be patient for a little while. Then she would be able to rise to the very top. The magician said that if she were in this square, she would have immediately killed this freak. Then she looked at her assistants and asked one of them why he was still here. This assistant didn't know what to answer her and didn't understand why she was so demanding of him. The magician answered him that she meant him specifically because he was crying that he had lost his conscript. She wanted to know if he had found him. The other assistants didn't know this, and at that moment they turned their heads and looked at him. The assistant said that everything is fine. He found him and the guy is fine too. She looked at him and asked if it was true. The assistant was very scared. The tears rolled down his face, but he continued to insist that of course it was true and even tried to laugh. She said that she likes us recruits, but she can't stand those who curry favor only with the boss, and of course they can ignore it. It's their choice, but they should keep it in mind. She looked at her assistant and told him that as long as he was a magician, he would not be able to avoid meeting her. After her words, the assistant made a conclusion that was obvious, that she needs to give a bribe, then she won't pick on him on every issue. The assistant left the room. You understand that he had nothing more to do there and walked down the long corridor. At that moment, for some reason, he remembered that same guy himself. He walked down the corridor and thought only about him because he was soaring and was much stronger than all the other new recruits. And that guy had a pretty strong crystal, but it was unclear why he needed information about it. I thought that the guy really decided to harm her. Then he also helps him, and he will harm her with his help. The assistant turned his head to the side again and looked at her. He needed to think about what to do next. Even time in the forest, the werewolf attacked the girl a little more and he would have bitten her. At that moment, he heard that someone called him. The werewolf, without turning his head, asked who this was. Then he added when he saw who it was that he was just looking for him. Kim-sun stood before him. The werewolf was glad that he himself had come. At this moment, the werewolf even forgot that he was in this forest. In order to bite the girl, he switched to his enemy. Pak Aram was not yet completely used to being a werewolf. Sometimes he did not understand what was happening to his body. Kim-sun told him that unlike people, animals instinctively sense who is in front of them. Then the young man added that a werewolf must sense who is in front of him, prey or predator. And what the werewolf is feeling now is most likely a feeling of fear. That's why he's all shaking. Pak Aram tried to defend himself, saying that he was actually a werewolf, but he had no choice but to raise his hands up and surrender. Kim-sun used one hand to make his signature grip on the werewolf's neck and squeezed it so tightly that it was impossible for him to breathe. The young man then raised it above his head and swung it to throw it into a nearby rock. When the werewolf hit the rock, the stones started to fall and he fell down with the stones. The werewolf lay on the ground with his body flattened. He tried to raise his head. He persuaded that he couldn't lose like that. Pak Aram was very upset because he was told that he would be the strongest in the square if he became a werewolf. Kim-sun don't give him a single chance, once again swung the bat that was in his hand and hit the werewolf. He said that it was just crap. This blow hit the werewolf right in the chest so that he could not stay on his feet. The young man said that he is not the strongest. He is just a pathetic rag. Both werewolves fell to the ground again. His wounds were quite large and the werewolf could not resist. Then Pak Aram, in the werewolf's body, began to call for help from the chief, and then the magician who was helping him. Kim-sun knew he had a chance, and he had to destroy this guy while the mage wasn't controlling him. Both werewolves and cried out for help. Kim-sun swung to deliver another blow. At that moment, a very loud cry was heard, and from the forest Pak Aram shouted, "Does he know who his father is?" He was already a myth of the werewolf's body and was in his own body. He said that his father was the commander of the Order of Iron Blood, the commander of the order himself. He is a higher boss. If he kills him now, then he will be in trouble. He was sure that it would somehow affect the young man. Kim-sun answered him, "Is this really true? But he only recently became a conscript. How could the commander send his son to the conscripts?" Pak Aram replied that he himself does not know. It seems that having returned from another world, he came to him and said that he is the son of a commander and can bring wealth and glory to this world. Those who returned to Earth were found recruited by you from another world as sons and daughters of the strongest. Now it was clear the conditions for choosing candidates. The commander of the Order of Iron Blood had 3 children. But because of the curse, he lost everyone. It was unclear what kind of catastrophe threatened the world. How could such a freak be brought? Kim-sun looked at this freak who was lying in front of him and realized that he was worth nothing at all. Pak Aram asked the young man if he was doing this because of Ha Yeon-jun, and then he added that it wasn't his fault. Ha Yeon-jun was the first to treat him like that. Kim-sun couldn't stand it anymore. He didn't want to listen to this Euros anymore. He took the bat that was in his hand and stuck it right in his mouth. At the same time, he said that he was ready to share one secret in this world. Power solves everything, but one should not rely on power alone. Pak Aram couldn't say anything clearly. He tried to mumble that he understood everything and he understood what he wanted to say. Kim-sun shoved the bat even harder into his mouth and added that if he didn't understand, then for some reason there is always someone stronger than him. He then pulled the bat out of his mouth and threw it aside and added that there were no reprieves or pardons in this place. And if he didn't know, then one mistake and he's finished. He should have thanked Mother Nature who accepts such scum as he. Pak Aram didn't say anything. He held his mouth with his hand. When he turned around, he saw that there were many red eyes around that were approaching him by the smell of blood. These eyes belonged to the blood demons who fled here for the smell of blood. Pak Aram was left alone, covered in blood, and there were demons around him. He screamed for them to get away from him as far as possible. He tried to tell them that he was the son of the commander of the Order of Iron Blood, but this demon was not interested. They smelled blood. The very next moment, blood splashed all over the sides, and it seemed like it was everywhere. Kim-sun thought about the breeze that blew, and his mood improved. Kim-sun turned his head and saw a miracle shadow to the side. He did not understand how it could happen that he did not notice the presence, which happens very rarely. The very next moment, he saw that same girl in front of him. She said that she wanted to finish off this werewolf, but he got ahead of her. She came here alone to kill a werewolf, which means she wasn't just a conscript. He wanted to know who she really was. For a conscript, she was too fast, too strong, and too smart. So the young man had to exclude the eye of truth to find out who she was. She showed on the board that her name was Di Soo-jin. Her strength was 25, agility 25, health 25, magic power 10, intuition 10, and her equipment was a staff of the spiritual wolf. He thought that the indicators he saw nothing special, then she was one of the returned. The girl asked the young man if he was always so silent, or if it was a precaution. Kim-sun did not want to explain anything to her. He asked what she needed. He then added that it was better to think carefully before answering. The girl said that she agreed and would speak briefly without any formality. Judging by the fact that he had dealt with this freak, it seemed to her that he was a good person. That is why she spoke, although she had previously felt that he was not just a conscript. The young man looked at her and said that she didn't look ordinary either. The girl said that he hit the nail on the head, but she won't say anything else and won't ask him anything else. She added that she is someone. If he saw the tablet with the notes at least 100 times, he would know her name. The young man thought that he knew it was the same one who took first place in the first rating battle. The girl said that she has a reason why she needs high scores, so she is looking for a capable assistant. Kim Sun asked her again that was why she saved Jung Jong-sik. The girl was a little surprised. Did he really see everything? And she thinks that Song Sor-sik is an excellent warrior and has leadership qualities. The young man asked why she wanted to kill Pak Aram, because he could have become a powerful weapon for the rebels in the battles. The girl answered him that he was wrong, that he would only cause harm, and she would lose more with him. It sounded pretty good, and the young man thought he was ready to join her, but he had one condition. He asked if she knew about hidden quests, especially those related to magic. The girl asked again if he was interested in hidden quests related to magic. She decided that she could tell him and then asked his name. The young man said that his name was Kim Sung-chol. When she heard his name, she asked again if his name was Kim Sung-chol. The young man answered her that he didn't understand that there was something wrong with his name. He turned around, otherwise he would leave. The girl screamed no. The young man was sure that in any case it was time to leave this place because guests were soon to arrive. The girl silently looked at him with her huge blue eyes. Indeed, very soon guests arrived at this place. Pak Aram's body was lying on the ground in a pool of blood. Only the head and a small part remained of the body. The magician who supervised him was very upset. She didn't understand why the hell he died. She was very angry and screamed at the top of her lungs that she would not leave it like this. She understood that if her protege died, then her career would be over. She had risen to her current level with such difficulty. The magician thought that his face remained intact and she would be able to use it even if it was already a corpse. The next morning, everything was calm and there was no sign that there would be any events that day. But already in the square, noise was heard. A guy dressed in a long black coat entered the square. Everyone started talking to each other. Could it really be Pak Aram? He had some kind of strange look. No one understood what was wrong with him again. This guy didn't come close to anyone. He was very strange. Kim Sung-chol knew for sure that this couldn't be and decided to come closer. The others asked him not to do it. When Kim Sung-chul came very close to him, the man who had Park Aram's face was very scared. It looked like he was turned into a soulless puppet using necromancy. Kim Sun tried to remove his hood, and it was clear that they also cast magic to prevent him from decomposing. Kim Sol knew he had a bad feeling about everything that had just happened. At this time in the palace, the magician in charge of Pak Aram called her assistant. She said that he should help her with Pak Aram, and then she said that the assistant should follow her. She had a plan since Pak Aram died. The assistant wanted to know what they did with his body and why she needed his help. She told him not to stand and to follow her. She already had a plan in her head. The assistant hurried and followed her. He didn't want to quarrel with her at all. The two of them went to the White Horse. It was a passage for slaves. He wanted to know why they were here. She told the assistant to take the test tube with blood and hold it in his hands. The assistant looked at this test tube, shook it, and asked if this was really what he thought. She told him that he himself could see everything perfectly well. It was werewolf blood and that he should be careful. It was a valuable thing. When he heard this, he thought that she had gone crazy, and in order to win, she decided to take extreme measures. The assistant, without thinking twice, sent a letter by messenger stating that Dolores Winterler was going to kill everyone from the White Horse at the end of the 5th. She was going to make 6 werewolves, and it was going to be a new disaster compared to, there it was, just child's play. Kim Sun understood that there were 6 werewolves in the blue square, and all 6 had to destroy the chosen ones. This was the main goal. He understood that in the white square there was so much noise from one werewolf, but the 6th rating battle would become a bloodbath. In this situation, he could not reveal his true identity. He did not understand what to do next. He decided to try to grasp at straws and get the magic book. When he took it out, a sleepy girl jumped out and asked why he called her. The young man wanted to ask about alchemy for something that could knock down several werewolves and that an ordinary person could also prepare it. The girl answered him that everything was obvious to her. She closed her eyes and began to remember everything she had read and knew about alchemy. Then she stopped. Her eyes were round and huge. She shouted that she had found what she needed. She showed a picture and said that he needed an eternal flame. The young man asked again, and she replied that he needed the eternal flame only because werewolves cannot stand flames. Kim Sun wanted to ask her where he could get this eternal flame, but she got ahead of him and asked if he could find the ingredients. Without thinking twice, he set off to find the ingredients. He needed to climb the highest mountain. He needed to get the gold stone. It was the most flexible material, and he was able to get it with his hammer. Then to get the next ingredient, he went to the Queen of Bloody Pudding. She was just as huge and disgusting. It took him quite a bit of effort to get the blood of the Blood Pudding Queen, which was also a plastic material. He went further and he needed to fight the Manticore killer and get her heart. It was another plastic material. The girl from the book, when she saw him getting the material, asked him who he was. The young man said the ingredients were perfectly collected. He was interested in what next, because he didn't know a single alchemical recipe. She told him what and why to throw in, and when the bloody pudding starts to boil, all the ingredients had to be combined. The girl told him that she looked like he was thinking about alchemy, like Apollinaire found it unclear what he was thinking about at all. She tried to explain to him that the compatibility of ingredients increases when using Manticore heart juice. He added it. She didn't know how to help him. Then he added the last ingredient, the golden stone. Its properties were strong firepower and was mainly used as fuel. The scoreboard showed that the smelting was successfully completed and the eternal flame was ready. It was a highly flammable material. If you pour water on it, it will burn even more strongly. The young man said that he had done some research, and if he had cooked according to the recipe, then it was not so difficult. The girl told him in his ear that the smelting had been successfully completed. She was only interested in one question. Was he really once a cook? Kim Sun thought of only one thing, that Dolrance wanted to destroy all the chosen ones. This was because she wanted to hide her mistake and get rid of Pak Aram. He brought him and sat him aside, understanding that this Pak Aram could no longer cause any harm. The next thing he did was pull off the very cloak that was wrapped around his body. This creature that stood before him reminded everyone with great difficulty of Pak Aram. It was all covered in scars and abrasions. Kim Sun knew very well that this was a deathmatch rating match, but he was sure that there would be extra time to predict the outcome of the qualifying battle, and he knew that each team would choose 3 captains. During a death match, the captain usually hides behind his teammates. Well, the Blue Horse's confidence was the key, because they had 6 werewolves, since the death of a werewolf cannot even be imagined, which means the captain and they will also try to choose from the werewolves. He thought of only one thing, that all these werewolves needed to be put on the front line so as not to have to fight an extra time. That was the only way it could work out for him. The candidates for the position of captain of the White Horse were Jong Sik, a certain Kim Hakchul, Li Ye Hong, and he. In all, there were only 5 people. He understood that his place was definitely on the player's court. Now it was necessary to decide who would take the remaining 2 places. At that moment, when he was deciding what Dashi would do, the same guy who decided that he was the main one among the chosen ones approached him and asked Kim Sun if he wanted to tell him anything. The young man understood that he was unhappy with his last battle and did not even hide it. This guy tried to convey to Yakim Soni that the person in charge said that this time, the extra time of the rating objection will be the qualifying matches. And then he added that they should choose 3 candidates, and in his opinion, he suits them. He should hide behind the backs of the chosen ones. The young man did not understand how else he would act, and this was completely contrary to his proposal. The chief of the chosen said that some of the chosen are already rotting, and in this mortal battle they will go before you in line. The young man asked him again if he really wanted to do that, since he could die at that moment. The guy adjusted his glasses and said he was just trying to scare him. Kim Sun said if that's the case, then he doesn't want to participate in this anymore. Then he turned around and walked the other way. As he had planned, at that moment a selection of a group of candidates of this idiot who considered himself the main one among the chosen ones was taking place. Kim Sun went to the guys of one of the groups. He needed to put everyone in their place in the next battle. The leader of this group said that in any case their group is the largest, and they have a conscience. The young man told him that the front line was in great danger. If they were too active, then someone would definitely run up to them, and this could not be allowed. He also said that a select group will go forward, so they need to watch this group and under no circumstances die. The group leader asked if this would be enough to win the next battle. Kim Sun thought that Ento might not be effective, but he couldn't let their people die. The second position was taken. Immediately after that, he went to another camp where the leader was Chung Sik. He asked him not to let him and his group go forward. Chan didn't understand why he needed this and why he was asking him, to which the young man told him that he tried not to go in the front rows and that he should wait to the side. Chan got very angry and started shouting that the chosen bastards were raising their points, to which the young man replied that if points were more important to him than life, then he could ignore his words. And then he added that he wants him to become captain in the elimination game after the death match. Chan did not expect such a proposal, but his words were very convincing. He decided to listen. Kim Sun said he would be one of the 3 representatives and one of the captains. Chan laughed very loudly. This proposal seemed quite funny to him at some point. So he replied that Kim Sun was a great comedian and decided that he would do as he asked and rely on him once. Kim's son put everyone in their places as he thought all the positions were taken. The young man was returning through the training ground and saw that same girl there. He said that she looks pretty good, the girl answered him. That she thinks he has everything. He believed that she would also survive. He said that he really did it and thought that he should try to get the hidden quest after the death match. The next morning, everyone knew that the third battle would begin, the rules of which were a mortal fight. Additional time showed the winner in this fight. It was necessary to kill the other conscript mages. The blue square conscript magicians are the same people as the white square participants. In fact, the rules of the death match were quite terrible. Cutting down monsters and cutting down people are two different things. Survival itself did not bring any benefit. Everyone was scared and did not understand that this was a death match. A select group in this death match have taken the position that they need only make their presence known. Kim's son noticed that their leader was hot-tempered, and it finally dawned on him that they couldn't survive just existing. Kim's son heard from someone behind that he needed to die but not to run away from death. He realized that it was one of the group leaders because he told him to just stick with the group, Li Pi Hong. Well, this guy kept saying that in this rating battle, they definitely need to get a good rating. The fight on the scoreboard showed that they needed to fight for the sake of a sacrifice to a neutral god. The time limit was 30 minutes. The gates that were supposed to let the enemy in slowly began to rise, and it became clear that the enemy was approaching. From both sides, opponents began to move towards the center of this square. This must be their mortal battle. The first line was the line consisting of the chosen ones, at the head of which was their leader. He ran ahead of them all holding his sword. He swung and struck the first of his opponents. The fight was on. At that moment, he smelled the dead. No one understood where this smell came from because it was only the beginning. Many were surprised when he realized that the guy he had just hit had begun to transform. And already in front of him was a completely different, huge werewolf. He got scared and took a few steps back. The leader of the group, when he saw this transformation, also froze. He thought, is it really a werewolf? And they released them against people? Immediately after one werewolf, all the others also transformed into werewolves, and they were all in the front ranks ready to attack people. It was only 30 seconds, but it was obvious that the White Horse people were very scared and were giving up. Observers from the stands noticed that White Square is an ordinary link and is easily allowed to be knocked down. One of the observers said that he thought that these would hold out until the gong, but they were a complete disappointment to him. The magician told him why not put it on the blue square this time and asked him if he had heard the latest news. At that moment, he asked her again if he really should join the White Square. The magician smiled, looked at him and said that he just needed to go over to the winning side. She thought that he should wait a little because it was about to start. The head looked at what was happening and could not find his son. He had not been seen lately. He was even a little disappointed and thought that it was in vain that so much trouble had been taken with him. One of the leaders, when he saw the werewolves, said that his team was scattering. The chief among the chosen ones did not understand what they were shouting at him and turned to hear. He could not even think that the werewolf was very close. The very next moment, the werewolf pierced him through and through so that blood spurted in all directions. The guys stopped and were scared because they didn't see such a picture. None of them wanted to die. The werewolves stopped and moved forward. They jumped on heads and gnawed out human organs. The guy who was the head of the chosen ones was lying on the ground, and Pasha tried to return, but he couldn't do it. The only thing he clearly understood was that this Kim's son, when he came to him and suggested how he would act, he needed to listen. He was lying without one arm and one leg. Kim's son stood waiting behind him was one of the guys who had a military crossbow, and the other had an energy shield. One of the guys who had an energy shield said that it was not a death match at all because the forces were not equal. It was unclear how it happened that there were 6 werewolves against them at once. Kim's son told them not to think that in the summoning palace there was anything like common sense. If they wanted to survive, then they needed to hold on to the items that he gave them. Among these objects was Pak Aram. He was just standing there, but the disgusting smell of a dead man emanated from him. One of these werewolves turned around and found exactly this smell. He immediately moved towards Pak Aram. Everything went according to plan. It was the smell of the magic of the saving dead, and all 6 werewolves smelled it. Now all that's left for this werewolf to do is eat those from whom this smell emanated. The werewolves rushed towards this smell and rushed to the place where Pak Aram was. Kim's son told his guys to get ready because both relatives smelled the scent and were approaching them. He told everyone to calm down and get ready for a fight. When the werewolves were very close, the young man shouted fire so that his guys could hear. And they fired many arrows towards the werewolves. What was their disappointment that these arrows fired from a crossbow did not work? And all the other arrow rods and everything they were capable of didn't work. The next thing they tried was the staff and its magical power. With this staff, it was possible to stop werewolves, but only stop them, nothing more. The werewolves, receiving a discharge from this fluff, stopped, but then they continued moving with even greater aggression. And they were already very close to Kim-sun and his team of captains. The smell that Pak-aram emitted became stronger and stronger, and the werewolves were enchanted by this smell and approached him. It seemed that the werewolves did not feel anything on their way. They were ready to do something to reach their goal. But the one who emitted this smell, and they needed to understand where they were hiding this body. When one of the werewolves ran closer, the young man hit so that this werewolf stopped and turned over and flew back. This werewolf fell on his back, but all the others kept moving. None of the werewolves were going to stop. Kim-sun told everyone else to immediately run away in all directions, and he alone remained standing in that place. The young man explained to them that it was time for them to leave as planned. Someone tried to object. Well, the young man told them not to beat them and not to dare to die, and that everyone should run in different directions, and that's what they did. The werewolves were very close and ready to attack. Kim-sun walked up to Pak-aram, grabbed him by the shoulder and said, "Why is he relaxed? Aren't these werewolves his target?" At this moment, all the werewolves were standing opposite the place where they were waiting to pounce on their victim. Kim-sun clearly understood that Pak-aram was caught. Now he had to take the last step. The very next moment he jumped up and ran away, and all the werewolves attacked their victim. From all sides, they tore their victim into small pieces. It seemed that nothing would remain of Pak-aram's body. But it was just a trap for werewolves. Everything went according to plan, as the young man had thought up. He had to wait just a little bit and jump up and throw the eternal fire towards the werewolf. The fire instantly flared up, and all 6 werewolves were captured by this fire. The only thing left to do was to add water so that the fire would flare up even more. Kim-sun was very close. He needed to jump high enough to reach the stands, and at that moment throw water into the fire. Water is like pouring oil into a fire. Everything was burning, and not a single werewolf could survive from this fire. These werewolves could be heard growling in pain and helplessness. One of the werewolves, despite the fact that he was completely on fire, moved towards the guys. Kim-sun commanded the battle, and many arrows rained down on this werewolf. And the rest of the guys were hidden behind a shield that protected them. It was an energy field that these werewolves could not break through. The werewolves tried to attack them from all sides, but the energy field did not allow them to break through and move forward. And also a magic staff, with which one of their team threw these werewolves back to the side. She held these werewolves that were all on fire on the other side. These two, with a crossbow and a staff, were able to hold back the werewolves and not let them go further. Kim-sun understood perfectly well that everything went according to plan, as he wanted. He was pleased that he had built their actions correctly, and that there was some sense in it. The rest did not understand how they knew that instead of the enemy, werewolves would come, but now it was their turn. The guys from Chan-chan's group started to attack. He shouted at them to go forward. They needed to kill everyone else. The head threw down his binoculars. He was upset by what was happening on the battlefield. He thought that Pak-aram was clearly there. He wanted to know what was going on there. He was angry. The fat man told him that he looked like he didn't know anything at all. And then he added that he went to the blue square of the white square and advised him to bet on the blue ones. Then he thought that the magician Dolrens would not be enough for him to just tear her apart. I was watching everything that was happening. It was clear that the situation was continuing to change. All that was left for her was to use magic. Assistant Mac understood that he certainly had information, but he had destroyed 6 werewolves alone, and if something went wrong, he would be the only one to blame. The magicians decided that in any case they needed to take aim, they needed extra time, and they needed to call the gladiators. She added that so that her assistant would not make her repeat herself, she needed to call the gladiators. The battle was over. The blue square had won. More people had survived in the white square. At this time, the mandatory counting had begun, and the conscripts had to stay in their places. The head of the chosen ones stood up and saw that they had won. Well, at that moment, as soon as he thought and raised his head, he felt that someone hit him with a huge brick from behind. He turned his head and saw a homunculus standing next to him, holding a huge stone in his hands. The guy shouted that he had survived. The homunculus said that outside the summoning palace, there is even more hell than here, and it is better for him to die now than to live as an invalid for the rest of his life. The guy absolutely disagreed because he actually survived and was not ready to die. The homunculi came to clean up and finish off those who were still breathing. They had to die too. Everyone else was watching. It was very cruel because these guys were still alive. The count was completed, There were as many survivors from the white square side as from the blue square side. Kim Sun thought it was disgusting. He didn't even know they would stoop to that low to reach equality. He thought if they chose from here, they would have to get rid of the trash that was destroying the world. The result of the death match was a draw, so an extra match should start right away. The survivors wanted to at least take a little rest. Many did not understand whether they really killed people so easily. Others wanted to know how much longer they would have to do this. The result of the death match was a draw, and they knew they would have an extra round. It seems like the idiots who came up with everything didn't think to spare them. Kim Sun told the survivors that if they wanted to live, they should stop whining and join the others in the meeting. In another part where their opponents were, it was the camp of the blue square. They believed that the loss of the werewolves had knocked down their table. A man appeared in their camp who said that it was for this reason that the people sitting above sent him. They sent him to help them. He was the same assistant who had to make sure that this camp did not lose. Many of the guys started saying that he was without a rowboat, and did he know how to hold a sword? One of the guys took out his sword and told him to stop talking nonsense. They didn't need the help of some suspicious scumbag, and they weren't even going to believe him. The magician snapped his fingers once and said to believe or not, it is their business and it is their choice. Right after he clicked on this coffin, the head of the new man with the ball caught fire, and he was burning in front of everyone's eyes, but no one could understand him. Then the magician, when this guy's head was completely burned, said that it was time for them to talk seriously. The magician told the other guys that as far as he understood, they would secretly change the gladiator. And in order for them to destroy the white square in the elimination game, they had to come up with a plan. And they had one. Of course, he was a cunning fox. The magician didn't fully understand the essence of this plan, but he decided that he also needed to participate in all of this. Cho Seong-taek received a letter from a magician which said that this magician is responsible for his son Park Aram, and that recently the commander of the third attack group put his son's safety at risk, in which the issue of receiving a bribe played a major role. After reading this letter, the head of the Iron Blood Order became very upset and angry. He crumpled this letter out of anger. He immediately blamed the commander of the third attack group. He believed that what was written in the letter was true, and that he was the one to blame for the death of his son. He called Dolrance to him. She had to explain what actually happened because she was also responsible. At one point, he put on his clothes to appear before his subordinates. He ordered the arrest of the commander of the attacking group. His guards ordered the commander to follow them. This was the order of the head. The commander of the third group shouted to be let go so that some misunderstanding would occur, but it was all useless. At that time, Dolrance was listening to the order. She was given the task. Even if she didn't succeed, we would give her the task to make it work. Dolrance understood perfectly everything that was happening and agreed with the disciplinary leader. The homunculus repeated to her once again that if it doesn't work out, then it's necessary to make it work out. Dolrance agreed and told him to go and announce the new rules. The homunculus went there and shouted for everyone's attention and said that he had good news. The surviving guys listened attentively. They did not understand what the new disciplinary leader meant. And you still haven't added that you won't be able to finish the prediction round because the legendary Hydra is feeling unwell. The magician thought that this would be enough for Ma San-gil to guess. The fact that there will be no prediction of victory and defeat. Many guys did not understand what it means. Hydra does not feel well. It is not clear what was happening. It wasn't even funny. The palace of the summoning of the god of order, the place that governs neutrality, kindness, and honesty, behaved in such a way Kim Sun also didn't quite understand. Homunculus announced that they would choose a captain based on the points scored reflecting the activity in the match rating. In front of everyone, a table appeared, and candidates from both sides, from the blue square and from the white square. In front of everyone, the question arose of whom to choose. They did not understand. Other captains of the square could also choose, or only they choose. Kim Sun perfectly understood what the plan was. I don't know how strong the opponent was. All these guys will choose as captains, those who belong to their area. The homunculus shouted that their time was up and they had to make their choice. It would depend on the captain whether they would survive or die. And the rest of the guys started to get indignant because they didn't understand that up there, they just slaughtered the people. I understand that they will all die. Homunculus, at this point, said that the survivors will receive a double reward. The conditions for victory were that they had to kill the enemy within 10 minutes. The one who wins will be able to restore 2 people in case of loss, get rid of all team members. The new conditions were completely unexpected for Kim Sun. He understood that he needed to do something. At that moment, he noticed that on the other side was Kirill Legal, the same magician who supposedly helped him. The young man wondered why this idiot was on the side of the blue square. He noticed that this guy had watcher's eyes above his head. Could it be that he had gone over to Dalrin's side? The boys of Jongjong-sik shouted at him that their lives were in his hands and that they believed that he would win. He took a step forward, raised his hand and said, "Where is the representative of the blue square? Let him show his abilities." A commander from the enemy camp was running towards him. The commander of the enemy camp shouted that he would kill Chunchong-sik so that he would not be harmed. He tied protection to his legs and body. It seemed to him that he would become invincible. Jongjong-sik thought about the fact that the big stump to the leaf. He kicked the head of one of the guys that was lying on the ground towards his opponent. When this head flew up to the enemy, he immediately stopped and burped back. Then his opponent prepared to engage in battle. It seemed to him that he was much larger and therefore much stronger. Everything happened completely wrong. Chung-Chung-sik swung and hit him with one blow, and his opponent's head flew to the side like an ordinary ball. The victory was counted for Chung-Chung-sik. The guy's body stood there for a while, and from where his head should have been, blood was spraying all over the place. According to the rules of this game, if the commander loses, then his entire team loses. The guys of this losing commander did not understand why they were in the air. They asked to be released. But it was impossible. The next moment, what was happening was like a bloody mess. Jongjong-sik stood and watched. His face and body were covered in blood, but he was glad that they crushed everyone at once. It was convenient and pleasant. The signboard showed that they were asking the second captain to come out from the side of the blue square. When the captain came out, he had a mask on his face. He told Chong-Chong not to spread his tail just because he killed one bastard. Right after these words, Chong-Chong struck this guy, but he managed to very quickly avoid this blow by putting his sword under him. Chong-Chong told him that he would definitely die too. But his second opponent was not as simple as the first commander, and he was unable to destroy him with the first blow. The second commander, unlike the first, began to attack himself. He swung to strike, but Chong-Chong put his sword out and deflected his blow to the side. When Anika was finished, Jongjong felt blood running down his face. His opponent saw that he had managed to inflict a wound and said that everything was ready. Chan-Chan told him that he needed to get a job in the circus and that he probably liked leaving little scratches. His opponent replied that he did not understand what these scratches were because his weapon was given to him for the quest, and this is Kukri's bleeding. In fact, even a small wound causes continuous bleeding. Kim's son, watching everything that was happening, understood that this was not good at all, but he had no opportunity to interfere. Chung-Chung's opponent said that he would squeeze all his blood out so that he would not be able to continue the fight. It was clear that this was very dangerous, and Chan-Chan himself understood that he needed to end this fight as quickly as possible. It was getting stronger and stronger. The opponent understands that he caused Chan-Chan quite serious damage. He said that he still owes him something for the last fight. Then this captain swung and decided he needed to kick. Then he did it. Then Chong-Chong couldn't stay on his feet. He staggered and fell back. Having flown and fallen on his back, Jongjong understood perfectly well that he most likely lost this fight. His opponent was practically celebrating his victory, but everything went completely wrong as the magician intervened. He dealt him a fatal blow, saying that in the midst of an attack, even a shallow wound is very dangerous. Jongjong held his wound, but the blood did not stop spurting out. The blood was quite strong. At that moment, he saw an opponent who was swinging and trying to finish him off. Well, what happened next, he definitely couldn't have foreseen. His opponent at some point became silent because something started happening to him. And then a large amount of blood splashed under his mask that was on his face. Jongjong's opponent fell dead, and the next moment it was clear that his entire team was destroyed. Chan-Chan was lying on the ground. His eyes were already closed, but he understood that he had won. Kim-sun, watching from the side, did not understand why he was interfering with the outcome of this battle and what he really had in mind. In turn, the magician thought that he killed this guy following orders, but he wanted to know what Dalrins was planning. Then he heard the order that Ma Sang-gil was arrested, but they didn't have any extra time. They needed to get rid of the white square and draw attention to the blue one before releasing this idiot. Having received the order, he understood how he should act further, and the very next moment the board showed that a third of the captain was being asked to leave. At that moment, the same girl screamed that they waited because they wanted to replace the player. The homunculus looked at her and asked again, what does it mean to replace a player? That is not in the rules of this game. The girl insisted that if they weren't going to kill them all, then they had no reason to refuse, did they? Homunculus first told me to wait, then I told her, okay. He allowed me to do it just this once. The board showed that the second captain should go forward. Chan-Chan, when he left the battlefield, said that he would owe her. She told him not to talk nonsense and go and rest. Kim Sun and this girl realized that the third captain of the blue square was emitting unusual energy. And when this third captain was already ready for battle and did not understand that his weapon was unbearable to find in the summoning palace, she needed to act as carefully as possible because her opponent was strong enough and she couldn't let him down and lose. There was something really strange about this guy who was standing in front of her, so it was unclear who he was. Kim Sun told her not to forget that they were working together. If something went wrong, she would have to give him a signal. The girl replied that they wouldn't be able to cope. If they broke the rules, they could die first. To which Kim Sun replied that it doesn't matter. Now there is nothing like rules in the conscription palace. If they find the right way, then there won't be any problems. He raised his hand and told her that in any case she should try not to die. The homunculus raised his two paws up and shouted that the next battle would be worthy of a finale. The guy who was her opponent held a chain in one of his hands and began to unwind it. The girl thought that it would be very difficult to attack suddenly in such a wide space. She had no choice but to use blitzkrieg in this case, and she headed towards the enemy. Her opponent dodged the blow she was trying to inflict on him. She understood that the chain he was unwinding was protecting his body, and she needed to be very careful. As she approached her opponent's chain, it caught her sword and she couldn't do anything with it. Her opponent yanked one hand on the tenacious grip he had, trying to pull the sword out of her hands. The girl said that he was a complete idiot because there were enough swords on Earth and she could take any of them. The girl bent down, took one of the swords that were closest to him, and immediately struck him, piercing his body, as it seemed to her, right through. But she was very surprised because the blow was only tangential and did not really hit her opponent. She looked at her opponent and did not understand what was happening because he most likely used magic. The sword remained in his body, but he acted absolutely calm as if nothing had happened. And the very next moment the enemy began to attack the girl, she was completely unarmed. When the enemy took a few steps forward, she had no choice but to retreat. She understood that her opponent was serious, and in addition, he decided to use an additional spear to reach her. The blow he tried to deliver with the spear was not quite accurate. The girl was able to avoid this blow at the last moment. Despite the fact that she was unarmed, she avoided the attacks and blows of the enemy. After one of the enemy's blows, a wound appeared on her cheek and blood flowed from it. When the magician saw what was happening, he received an order that it was great. All that was left was to withdraw all the gladiators. He did not understand and tried to ask again. But Dolrance also told him so, that he would not contradict her instructions. In any case, she told him that no one would leave the summoning palace alive. It was impossible. The girl's opponent pulled her sword out of his shoulder and blood spurted out. The girl also decided to use the wolf spirit staff. She thought that the blue square was going too far. And in this battle, she decided that it was time to even the score. So she released the spirit wolf and ordered him to tear the enemy to pieces. Along with her, two wolf spirits of her opponent began to attack. The very next moment, the wolf spirit attacked the enemy and knocked him to the ground. She penetrated, desperately resisted, and fought off the spirits of the wolves. Even at some point, it seemed that the spirit of the wolf could not cope with him. Despite the fact that he was constantly being attacked, the enemy defended himself. The girl was able to approach the enemy from behind and swing in order to strike him. But suddenly she felt that someone behind her was trying to grab her with huge pincers. She jumped up to avoid this blow. And then a lot of arrows were directed towards her. All this was unexpected and strange for her. One of these arrows hit her in the shoulder and pierced her through and through. Her opponent easily dealt with the wolf spirits and went on the offensive against her. The girl thought that it was some kind of curse because she couldn't just die because she had a mission that needed to be completed. She swung with all her might and threw the mask off her opponent's face. At that moment, her opponent fell to the ground and behind him stood Kim Sun. All the other guys who were helping that enemy turned and looked towards the young man. The homunculus started screaming, "What was this? It was a violation of the rules?" Kim Sun answered him that if this is a violation of the rules, then he should shut up because this guy's mask has come off. Then they will know the whole truth. The young man picked up the guy's head, which was lying at his feet, and asked if anyone could explain his fight with the gladiator. And then he asked if Cho Song-tek was also aware of what they were doing here. The magician turned to Mrs. Dolrance. He wanted to know what to do. He asked again that it seemed like this guy knew his head, and he needed instructions on what to do next. But despite the fact that he constantly asked Dolrance for help, he heard nothing in response. The observer's eyes that were above his head were torn into small pieces and scattered in different directions. The magician hurried to run away and started screaming for her to die. Kim Sun at this point turned to the disciplinary officer and said that it was time to announce the result. The disciplinary leader had no choice but to actually agree with him and announce the result. So he said that he congratulated everyone. It was a draw, and everyone had passed the test and the qualifying round of the recruiting palace. Then he added to those guys who remained alive that if the sun goes down today, they will hold a graduation ceremony. The boys did not stay long. Otherwise, they would be glad that they had survived. They thought that the torture in the conscription palace was over. Dolrance urged the homunculus on, saying that there was no time to mess around and that they needed to leave quickly. She said that now she is leaving the palace, but someday she will return, and everyone will definitely pay her. Before she could finish speaking, she felt a strong blow to her head from a hand. Someone's huge hand was holding her head, and this person said, "Does she really hope that she will be able to return to the palace?" This voice said that he had not seen her for a long time. It was a huge man with many scars on his body. The surviving guys thought that everything ended well, and finally the second palace of summoning was passed. The only thing left for them was this school of magic. Kim Sun was lying on the clearing and thinking that he needed to collect the necessary information for the Golden City. At that moment, someone was carrying him. It was that same magician. He said that it was because of him that they failed. But thanks to him, he dealt with two annoying flies at once. This magician looked like a madman. He shouted that now the summoning palace was his body, and he called for the young man to become his slave. Kim Sun answered him that he had finished off the piece. If he had not stuck his head out, he would have left him alive. Then, assuming his normal form, the young man swung his hammer and said that he did not think he had the chance to live long with his insight. The magician did not understand why he was doing this, why he was an enemy of the world, why they were treating him this way. The young man answered him that when he saw his appearance now, even he felt sorry to kill him. With his first blow to Ramir, he destroyed all the gladiators who were with this magician. But he realized that the gladiators were being replaced by new ones, and that this Poppy was controlling them. So the young man had no choice but to destroy them all. He swung and delivered another powerful blow. The blow was so powerful that it was visible even from the hickeys that surrounded this place. There was a huge crater in front of the young man. He struck with such force. He stood in front of him. The body of a magician lay, trying with all his might to say something. The young man said that it was very strange that Mach could control a gladiator. He stood like a hero, asking the magician, because it was all his work, because in fact, he was a slave hunter. One of the gladiators couldn't hold back and started asking to sit down. The hero did not understand why he should leave him alive. Whiskey and reasons were needed for this. The gladiator replied that if he spared him, he would faithfully serve him until his death. Then he took the crystal that was in his hands and pierced his chest with this crystal in the place where his heart was. He said that he swears with his life to serve the hero faith and truth until the end of his life. The hero looked at him and said that he thought that this didn't look like simple chatter, and maybe he would find it useful. After some time, a sign appeared on the board stating that graduates must enter the altar of light and open their veils and change classes. Everyone hurried to complete this task, and Kim Sun hurried along with everyone. He was blessed with an echo. The very next moment, he received congratulations that he had received the Echo Mage class. The young man was pleased that he had reached this point, and he only had a little bit left to reach the very end. His thought was interrupted by a girl. She asked if he was busy now or ready to talk to her. She told him not to forget about their agreement, as she promised she will now show him the hidden quest. She added that he shouldn't choose the highest difficulty level when they got to the place. Then she added that if something goes wrong, he might not survive. And when he moved to complete his quest, she said that she would wait until 3 o'clock. If he did not get out during this time, then she would consider him dead. The young man began to dive, did not turn to her. He said that it was good and she could not wait for him. The girl looked after him and quietly told him not to die, just like he told her when she went into battle. A young man stood in front of a headless statue of an angel. Touching this statue with his hand, he decided to see what kind of quest it was offering him. As soon as he touched this headless statue with his hand, a bright light appeared from it. This quest was called the Road of Sorrow. He walked along this road. I don't understand why it was called the Road of Sorrow. At some point, he realized that this was actually the devil's path leading to hell. It smelled very bad here. It was a hidden quest, the forgotten path of the 7 heroes, Sakados. The stench was unbearable, and to stop it from stinking so much, he covered his face with his hand. He knew that Sakatos was a verbosity, and unlike Wester, who used it to repeat the same spell over and over again, he was the only multi-touch user who could use several different types of magic at the same time. The young man wondered if this was really Sakatos's hidden quest. For him, it was a godsend. He was delighted. Now he had to choose a path. The level of difficulty of the test depended on the path. He was offered a slow climb, a steep descent, an unexplored road. The young man did not hesitate for a second. Of course he chose the high difficulty himself and did not follow my path. As soon as he chose his path, everything around him began to change and move around him. The board showed a warning to watch his step. The young man barely had time to react. He thought that something like this should be warned about in advance. Then he realized that he was on an unknown path. He saw a huge scorpion tail in front of him. This scorpion came out of the sand and very quickly began to approach the young man. When the scorpion came closer, the young man instantly struck it, destroying it from afar. Even though the scorpion was much larger than the young man, it was destroyed in one blow and lay on the sand in a pool of blood. Kim Sun walked on. He shook the dust off his shoulder and said that he was not surprised at all. A task about a stupid king who was supposed to appear before him appeared before him. This stupid king, wanting to gain immortality, made a deal with the devil, one of the conditions being that the royal army would never know. This immortal king was very surprised that a mortal chose such a path, a well-explored road. The immortal king said that the young man first needed to deal with his army, and he summoned his entire army to attack him. Kim Sun decided that his hammer could help him right now, and the magician Sokatos created his own path to the underworld. The young man swung once, then a second time, then a third time, and said it was time for him to have some fun. He threw his hammer into the crowd of this army so that the hammer smashed almost the entire army. The next moment, a pile of bones from the soldiers of this army lay on this field. Then these bones were collected into one hole, and the army was ready to attack again. The young man realized that they were all dead, but they still rise, and he needs to act a little differently in this case. In order for them not to get up, he increased his hammer by a certain number of times so that it covered them all. Kim Sun decided that he needed to make several blows from above so that he could turn this entire army into dust. The Mad King became very angry when he saw that he had no army left at all. He did not understand what was happening and decided that he needed to go on the offensive. Kim Sun was ready for this and jumped up and swung his hammer to strike the Mad King and told him that he was not a small fry. The Mad King believed until the very end that he could cope with this unfortunate man, and he said that he didn't notice at all. The young man understood that his only salvation was to catch the captain, which he did. When the head of this huge monster flew off, he thought that this could not be seen. He had a contract with the devil. The young man threw his head to one side and his body to the other and told him that he was finished. But the board showed that the army of the stupid king had died out. And then it turned out that he had the elixir of the finale. It was an effective means of resurrecting the dead. Kim Sun wondered if it could really resurrect. Of course, it was unexpected for him that it really does exist in this dimension. He decided to take this bottle. He extended his hand forward to this bottle, and when he was almost at his goal, he squeezed this bottle with his fist, and nothing was left of it. Before his eyes was a huge flowering tree in a beautiful clearing. Inside this tree there was a girl with her eyes closed. She was sleeping. The board showed that the final elixir had disappeared. He opened his palm and saw that the elixir was indeed disappearing. Then he heard someone say that he had failed. He raised his eyes and saw a guy in a hood and with a staff in front of him. Kim Sun asked him if he had read his memories at the moment of touching him. The guy standing in front of him laughed and said that it was just a greeting, but he really has a daughter. So he is so desperate as expected. He is a great father. In fact, all the children of another dimension died from the curse, and his daughter looks like this fate did not pass. The young man swung his hammer at him and then hit him and told him to shut up. This man said that next time they can fight, and he is a deeply loving father. The man who was in front of him turned into smoke and began to disappear. Kim Sun waited for what would happen next. He had doubts. But the board showed that he had completed the forgotten path of Sakados. His reward was magical power plus 25, and he was also given a magical blade, the Hellish Heart, which was a fairly rare reward. Everything around him began to collapse, burn, and rebuild. The young man thought that maybe he was unlucky. The reward was better than Vestiar's Hellish Heart. It was a blade, they call it the masterpiece of a crazy blacksmith that burned in the fire. The man in front of him laughed and said that he really likes him and he feels it. The next task appeared on the board. It was a goblin card. It was a card that pointed to something unknown. They showed him a ring with a blue ruby. A ring, a work of art made by processing a blue ruby. The young man thought that he was very sorry that the description was not very clear, but he decided that he would go anyway. This statue was now not only headless, it was completely broken. Just as he entered inside, he appeared back near this statue. As soon as he appeared, he heard the voice of a girl who was screaming to be let go because she said, Ma Sang-gil held the girl by the throat. She screamed for him to let her go, and he waited for Kim Sun to appear. The young man thought that Ma Sang-gil from Erden had iron blood. What was he doing here? He was very angry. He swung and hit the head that was lying in front of his feet, throwing it aside. This head with purple hair rolled on the ground. Threw it away so that the head rolled down. I thought the young man it was Dalrin's head. Kim Sun looked and saw that it was Dalrin's Winterler's head. He thought that she really did have a disgusting death. Ma Sang-gil began to say that he was very interested in the fact that at some point one very rich Ma appeared, and Dalrin's unexpectedly for everyone betrayed the white square and joined the blue. He began to blame the young man because he believed that it was he who planned everything. He wanted to get an answer. It was because of him that Pak Aram, his son, died. The young man said that he quickly regained his sight, and at that moment he took with one hand the stone that remained from the statue. Ma Sa-gil shouted at him not to be impudent because he could at any moment squeeze the throat of this girl who was in his arms. He asked the young man what the hell he wanted and what his plan was. Kim Sun answered him that if he was frank at that moment he swung to throw that very stone in his direction. He said that he wanted to graduate with top marks, and at that moment he threw this stone. The stone flew at a very high speed straight towards its target. This stone immediately fell into Ma Sa-gil's hand and killed her. Now the girl was safe and no one was holding her back. This one stone was followed by many more stones in its direction. And each of these stones hitting the enemy's body left a mark on that body. The young man's opponent, despite being wounded, shouted that he still wouldn't be able to kill him. Kim Sun didn't even intend to hear him. He took a step forward, took out his new sword and swung it. The young man told him not to whine and dealt him a fatal blow. He explained to him that all these people died only because they were weak and could not resist him. He had to follow the law of this dimension. His opponent was on fire and could not resist him. The very next moment his opponent was lying on the ground looking like a burnt corpse. The girl started talking about how it was a real monster and she almost died, and also asked the young man where he got such a weapon. Kim Sun replied to her that he had completed this quest and received this weapon as a reward. It was evening outside and they decided to make a fire and warm up near the fire. They prepared the food and the girl said that she hadn't eaten such a delicious meal for a long time. When she got tired of it, she said that now she knows his true face. The young man wondered what she meant. She then said that he was a first-class cook and confidently declared that today's dinner was truly the best in her life. The young man said that it would be good for a one-time snack. He only had 58 points in cooking. The girl was surprised. 58 points, do they really rate cooking too? The young man answered her that he only rates if there is skill. The girl became embarrassed and tried to ask the young man about what she had just heard. Usually she didn't ask unnecessary questions and wasn't curious, but in this case she became interested in what kind of rich magician they were talking about. The young man replied that he had given the person in charge a bribe to obtain information about the rating match. Why did he add that it was only known to the management, and she must have thought that he brought charges? The girl said, then it is clear if he knew something at the rating match, it is not surprising that he passed the tests every time. The young man thought that fortunately she must have understood everything. Then the girl said that she would also reveal one secret. She stood up and said that she was regressing. For him it was unexpected, he couldn't even imagine it. Therefore the young man asked her again if she had regressed, and said that he had completely lost his appetite. The girl replied that yes, she came from the future, what awaits them in 10 years. The young man asked why she needed a conscription palace. Was it really more convenient to live knowing what would happen? The girl began to make excuses and said that she needed a hidden quest called White Shadow. This quest was related to the highest hired killers. White Shadow is one of the 7 heroes. The young man asked her why she needed the art of the hidden White Shadow killer. The girl told him that this is what is needed to save the world from destruction. Then he asked her if she really came from the future to save the world, and if the world would really die in 10 years. He felt very strange. Could this really happen and he wouldn't save this world? He had many questions. He wanted to know why the world would perish and what kind of disaster this 7 heroes were. The girl said that the second disaster of the 7 heroes has been overcome, as has the third one predicted by the Book of Disasters. Then she lowered her head and continued to say that, however, they were faced with something that could not even be compared to the problem with the 7 heroes. The young man wondered if there was something even more terrible than this problem. She said that it really exists, and this is the enemy of this world, and this is Kim Sung-chol. At that moment when he heard his name, he realized that they were talking about him. Was he really that nightmare that she was talking about? The girl asked him again if this was really his name. She said that he was completely different from this person. She showed this man and said that he was much older and that he also had some differences. He looked like a demon. Then the young man lowered his head and thought that this couldn't be. He didn't believe her. He knew for sure that he couldn't become a demon. The girl Padna came up to him and told him not to worry. She was here to prevent this death from happening. Then she ran away and told him not to stay too long. She would never forget the price of her life. The young man fell to his knees at these words. He was afraid of what he could turn into. He looked up and saw that the next day was coming. His fire that had kept him warm all night had gone out, and only smoke was coming out. The young man thought that the future through which the regression had gone is not final, and everything can change at any moment. He also thought about the fact that he would never, for any amount of money, turn away from the right path. He had to know for sure that he would not turn away from the new path. When the next day came and the sun came out, he took off his jacket and stood looking at the palace. He understood that the time had already come, and it was time for him to move forward. He had very little time left to study magic. It was a place that did not obey any forces. It was a golden city, and newcomers were preparing for the start in this city. When they entered this city, there were banners hanging there that the summoning palace had a 50% discount in the weapons store, and many others. And it was in the golden city that the famous school of magic was located. He walked along one of the streets and heard that someone was shouting that it was very cheap. Come and see. And how long will he walk with a beginner's ball? He knew for sure that this was the best place to learn how to master magic properly. A man in a hood approached him and asked him about his arrival. Mr. Warrior, a young man, asked him for the results. This man said that he received permission to enroll a young man by paying even less than he thought. But the young man asked again what the problem was. Then the man said that there were rumors that the school was run by disaster followers. Kim-sun was very surprised. Could it be that the followers of the disaster were people of the cult who believed that the disaster held the key to solving the magical mystery? They dedicated all their magic to disaster and believed that disaster should initiate them into magic. This man said that he studied there and recommended it to him, but he had doubts. Terrible things always happened where there were these idiots. The young man, having listened to everything to the end, said that he liked it. They had almost arrived at the place. It was the Arrowfurt School of Magic. They had huge gates to get inside. When they got closer, they saw that right in front of the entrance, there were guys hanging, and there was a sign that those who give in to Arista will die. The young man thought that this was probably the work of the Holy Inquisition. The man said that the school rules were a bit cruel, but he was also seeing hangings for the first time. The young man said that at this stage they should break up and that he doesn't need his help for now. This man said that of course he understands everything, but if the young man meets his old acquaintances, he might have problems. Then he bowed and turned to the gentleman warrior and said that he should not forget to be sure to receive an appointment to the Repentance Corps. When he went inside, he immediately found himself in the main building of Arrowfurt in its admissions office. As he approached the table, he saw that he had been enrolled, and to some extent this made him happy. The dean of the School of Cryomancy and head of the Premier Commission, Rodert Danton, told the young man that the admission procedure was complete, and he pointed one finger to the side, explaining that next comes the assignment to the dormitory. He also added that if he chose this particular school, he should know about old Jogbart. The young man made a very serious face. He listened to every word, shook his head, and said that of course he knew. He came further and saw a chair and a hat was hanging on it. It was the same sorting hat. The young man came closer and sat down on this chair so that this hat was above his head. Then a stone appeared in this hat, and it began to glow a bright purple color. A voice told him that he should shout the name of the desired hostel to himself 3 times, he remembered, and began to say, "The core of repentance, the core of repentance, the core of repentance." The young man did not understand whether the hat listened to his thoughts or not. If it did not listen to his thoughts, then he would tear it to pieces, or maybe burn it or soak it in dirty water for a week, so that after a minute of its life it would be terrible. When he just thought so, the hat immediately screamed about the body of repentance. The dean of the faculty also heard the core of repentance and was a little surprised it was a closed dormitory. The young man said that he was just following the hat's instructions and nothing more. The dean asked the young man if Leon had heard any rumors about this school. The young man said that if he meant about the adept of disaster, then he already knows about it. The dean asked again even after he knew about this news. He still decided to come to this school. It was surprising, but the dean told the young man that he was welcome to the dying school where he would now study. "And didn't you walk along the long corridor, just the 2 of you, to that very dorm, Repentance?" The young man looked around carefully, but he didn't see anything suspicious. He noticed that everything around him was almost in disarray. As they walked past one of these different rooms, he asked the dean if this was also a dormitory building. On this building there was an inscription of the building Kova Koste. What it was not clear. The young man thought that alchemy was not a popular subject for him, but this was too much. He walked up the long stairs towards where his dorm was. The young man walked through the landing. He thought about what the dean told him, that it would be somewhere very close. And the most important thing was that it was a closed hostel, but it resembled some kind of cursed house. He came closer, and he saw that very source of knowledge, closed hostile repentance building. When he went inside, there was not a single person there. Everything was covered in cobwebs, and it seemed that there had been no human presence for a long time. Despite this, the young man did not stop and began to climb the stairs to the second floor. As he began to climb closer and closer to the second floor, he heard a voice that told him who dared to disturb his peace. The young man thought that this was most likely a sign, and there was nothing special about it, because he was in a school of magic. He turned around and saw a ghost with glowing eyes and also saw many objects hanging in the air. The ghost said that he had brazenly dared to ignore his warning. When this ghost came closer, he saw that this girl, her name was Sarasa Zero. She asked the young man if he really wanted to die. When he looked at her, he first thought she was 15, and then decided that she was most likely 16 years old, and if she was that old, it meant she was able to avoid the curse of extermination. He immediately noticed that she was not alive at all. She was shrouded from head to toe in the magic of preservation. It was some kind of crazy passion. He looked at her with fascinated eyes. At some point, he saw that an object very close to him broke into small pieces. The girl asked him if he was really scared. If so, then he could get out of here very quickly because outsiders were not allowed in. The young man said that he was asking her for forgiveness, but he was not a stranger at all, because he showed a document in which he was accepted into this school and was placed in this dormitory. He was enrolled today, and old Jogbart placed him in court. The girl was very indignant. She did not understand how this could happen and what it was. She broke everything around her. She said that he didn't believe in her. Jogbart couldn't do that. The girl went back into the darkness. She said that this can't be because it's a tradition. Then after thinking for a bit, she said that her name was Sarasa Zero, and she was from the Chromantia school. She had been studying here for 5 years, and he shouldn't ignore her. The girl said that girls live on the second floor, and if he goes there, he will die immediately. The young man wondered if he was not going to live, and this was threatening, so that she, who had not yet come to terms with her death, was the ideal dorm mate. The young man thought about what he was told all the time about this school of aeromancy. It was located at the very top, and this justified its name. He walked along a long corridor to the very top. He thought that everyone considered the school of pyromancy to be the strongest, but the school of aeromancy that uses the power of heaven is superior to it. These were the words of the same man who had a hook instead of a hand. The young man had been trying to achieve his goal for a very long time, and he was happy because he succeeded. Even then, he asked if it was because of the meteor. Wasn't this magic used in large-scale wars? It was hard to imagine, but it was true. This magic is capable of creating flashes of light to create a powerful weapon that will destroy everything in its path. Now he was interested in only one question. How long would it take to master this magic? He was told that it would take at least 5 years. It wasn't that easy to pump up magical power and intuition to 100. Then they also suggested that if he didn't like it, he could transfer to Logoted. He didn't understand why. Then my man said that the schools of cryomancy and pyromancy are fighting for power, and it is doubtful that the director has died 3 years ago, and his place is still empty. The young man took a sip from the toy and asked what the man was leading up to with this whole conversation. This man couldn't stand it and shouted that the school without a principal was stuck in a power struggle and that it was ruled by adepts of disaster. Then the young man asked why he was specifically logoted if there were normal directions there, and they told him that it was a new prestigious school. It was in this school that the best departments were not gambling. The young man said that gambling was not what he wanted to study, and he asked what he would say about the aeromancy teacher at Aerofort. Then the man answered him that this was one of the most powerful wizards in the school, and his name was Altusius Zero. The young man thought that he was hearing this name and surname for the first time. He most likely could not become famous for anything. The man said that there are rumors that this wizard killed the deputy head of the Assassin's Guild in a duel in his youth. Then the young man asked again what he had done. Was the mage's enemy really the deputy, the second strongest fighter in the guild, and died in a duel? Then the young man asked again, did the killer not take revenge for his deputy? The man replied that it was not known for sure, but they say that they made a deal, so the old man went into hiding at this school. Now everything was clear to the young man. He received all the information he could need. The man stood up and asked the young man if he should prepare to move to another school of magic. Kim Sun replied that no, he was staying at this school. He couldn't miss the opportunity to learn the magic that eliminated the deputy head of the Assassin's Guild. The only thing that bothered him was that he had to study at this school for almost 5 years. It was a very long time. He needed to master aeromancy as soon as possible. The next day, he found himself in the classroom of the aeromancy school and decided that he needed to start training as soon as possible. Going inside, he ran his finger along the table and realized that there hadn't been any students here for a long time. He didn't understand if that guy said that this was the strongest school. Did he really lie to him? The next moment, he heard the voice of a red-haired guy who asked him if he was a newbie. This guy was sitting and reading some book in a hammock. Then he got up from it and said that he was asking for forgiveness, but there hadn't been any new ones for a long time. This guy introduced himself as a student of alchemical, and his name is Reno Santom. He had a double major and also studied at the pyromancy school. The young man extended his hand to him and said that his name was Kim Sung Chol. The guy thought about it. Then this student said that the young man had a very terrible name. Then the student turned around and shouted loudly throughout the room. He told the professor that they had a new student. Immediately after these words of the student, one of them flew towards them. The two of them stood there and didn't understand what was going on and why he was behaving like that. The teacher said that he had composed and resigned, and he had nothing to teach the students. He could only give him this book. Then he added that in a week there would be an opportunity to change his specialty, and until that time, he should enjoy reading this book. It was that same professor of the aeromancy school, Altuchus Zero. The young man took that very book in his hand and thought that the teacher was somehow intractable, and was he really the most powerful magician in this school? He had no choice but to put Lyoka in this hammock and start reading the very book that this magician gave him. Then he sat alone in the huge auditorium and continued to study this book. He tried to figure out everything that was written there on one page. He saw a magic circle. It seemed strange to him that in the book of papers there is a magic circle, and that on it is shown in the direction of the image of the magic circle. He sat and looked at it from all sides and realized that it was a hidden quest. It was called the Echo Mage. The active skill in this hidden quest was the use of magic. He was glad that he found another hidden quest. He decided to move his finger exactly along the indicated movement of this circle. He immediately saw that this was the correct answer, and this was an understanding of the magic circle. It was only a basic level, but his intuition rose by 1 point. He decided that he shouldn't stop there, and that he should go further. This was a palace of conscription, and there were no such victims and so much blood here. That's why he decided to study it all the way to the very end, and he didn't think there were any difficulties. Another student looked at the young man with suspicion. He didn't understand why he spent so much time reading this book. Time passed, and the young man reached the very end of this book and this magical quest. The next morning, he came and gave his teacher that very book and said that he had decided everything and read it completely. He placed this book right in front of his teacher, waiting for him to say something. The teacher asked again if he could really solve everything in just a quarter of a day. The young man didn't say anything. He told the teacher to prepare another book for him, and he would come for it tomorrow. The teacher didn't understand that beginners need at least a month to finish this book. The teacher looked and saw that he had indeed solved everything. Everything was correct. The teacher was a little surprised how drawings could control magic, but that's exactly how it was. The teacher decided to find out who this new guy was. He typed up a list of students in this school, and it turned out that this guy's name was Kim Sung Chol, and he lived in the Repentance building. The teacher was very upset because it was in the dormitory of Repentance that his granddaughter lived, so he went to this dormitory. He was heading to this hostel and shouting Sarasa. When he ran inside, the teacher kept shouting Sarasa. He wanted to know where she was. The girl came out. She was sleeping, and that's why she couldn't open her eyes right away. She asked her grandfather why he was screaming so much. Her grandfather only wanted to know if she was okay when he saw her. He said that thank God nothing serious happened. The girl asked him if he was worried in vain because of the newcomer who was placed in this dormitory. She looked at her grandfather and said, if he is old, then he is worrying in vain, and he would have been better off taking care of himself. The young man heard this whole conversation from afar. Then Kim Sun thought that his teacher was the grandfather of this dead woman. He decided that he should find out everything. He became interested. He sat over the book and thought that he had definitely done everything as expected, but he did not understand what the problem was, and it was not that he could not read the ancient language at all. The problem was different. He didn't understand at all what the book was about. He even started to have a headache. He didn't know how to move forward and what to do. At that moment, he heard the voice of the same girl who lived in the place with him. She told him that he was pathetic, and if he didn't understand something, it was unclear why he didn't ask. The young man asked her if her grandfather had really told her everything. The girl replied that he had said that the new student had been reading the book non-stop for a whole week and hadn't asked any questions. The young man answered her that everything was exactly like that, because he was actually an unofficial student, and he asked her if Professor Altukius was her grandfather. Everything was as he thought. They were one family. The girl said that it was exactly like that, and that's why she knows a little aromancy. And no matter how he twists it, he still won't understand this book. The young man wanted to know why she told him that if he had not studied magic before, he would not succeed. The young man said no, he really hadn't studied magic. She said that to tell the truth. That's usually how it is. The girl said that she studied cryomancy, so she doesn't know for sure. But to learn aromancy, you need at least 120 intuition points and 150 magical power. The young man was very surprised that she named indicators that were much higher than he expected. The girl said even if he is expelled, he can still try on the school uniform and told him to undress immediately. In response, he told her not to touch him, he himself. This school uniform seemed uncomfortable to him, but she thought it looked much better on him than the one he usually wore. The young man wanted to know what she had just said about being expelled from school. The girl said that nothing special. If he doesn't find a leader within 10 days, he will be expelled from this school. He got angry and shouted that she could have said this earlier. He thought that if she had told him even one day later, he would have definitely been expelled. He went to the forge building. No one who talked to him told him what was happening in this building. When he went inside, he saw quite a large number of students there. Mostly they were either sitting or lying on the floor, and there were a large number of books and other magical elements near them. He thought it was a dying generation. He couldn't believe they had been doing this all their lives. Entering this office, he said that he was looking for a manager. He had very little time left to find a manager. In front of him sat Professor of the Alchemy School Basil Phyllis, who was smoking a hookah pipe. There was a lot of smoke around him. The professor looked at the young man and said, "Does a graduate of the Summoning Palace now want to become an alchemist?" He said yes. The professor asked him the reason for his coming to the almost fallen school of alchemy. The young man didn't lose his head and said that he wanted to improve his abilities. The professor opened the list of students and saw his name. He said that it was too creepy a name. He was also surprised that he was in the school of aromancy. He became interested. The professor said that he agreed, and Basil Phyllis became his leader. His specialty was aromancy, second specialty alchemy. The professor became the leader, and he lived in the dormitory building Repentance. The professor said that he was not only his supervisor, he was now his patron. The young man asked where he should start studying alchemy. The professor turned over to his other side and said that the training was starting. He had almost fallen asleep and only managed to tell him to read some books here. The young man thought that there was absolute chaos around him, but at least he had a supervisor. Now he definitely won't be expelled. So the young man went up to the bookshelf and decided that he should take one of them because the professor said that he could take anything. The young man knew that you must have Kalka again, and the ogres. He needed to figure it all out. He decided to start with this. He also got the book he received as a reward and started trying to practice alchemy. He swore that these parasites, he could not believe that they called themselves alchemists. What he did was very easy for him, and this school still seemed prestigious to him. The girl who helped him with the book on alchemy asked him about this school. She thought that probably this school is equipped with materials for developing talents. She told him that if he studied the entire textbook, he would increase his national statistics because, in his opinion, it was as easy as pie. He placed a huge cauldron in front of him, lit a fire, and began to pour liquids from different flasks into this cauldron. He succeeded. The first success was a healing ointment. The second success was a water slime tincture. The third success was a dog transformation tincture. His reward was magical power plus 3 intuition plus 2. It was a good reward, the girl said, let it be the initial level. But isn't it growing too fast? He entered Avar so much that he said that he was ready to do a lot of things. But suddenly he heard the sound of acorns. He saw that there was a squirrel on his shoulder trying to get one of these acorns. Then he thought, shouldn't there be at least one horror story? The reason he had to go to the Repentance Corps was right here. He remembered that he was told to be careful because the Raskar building was closed because of this quest. Well, despite this, he thought that he should find out what happened in this Repentance building. And for this, he decided to go to the secret room which was located behind the bookshelf. When he opened it and went down, he saw a long staircase going down, and he decided to go down it. At the very bottom, he saw a closed door. He thought that the quest was supposed to be behind this door because the note said that if at midnight on the last day of the lunar month after the moon rose, a circle would flow from the door crack, then this would mean the quest would begin. He stood near this door and waited. He understood that this quest had to start exactly this night and exactly here. He heard a lot of noise behind the door, and then he saw blood flowing. which meant only one thing. The quest would really begin. The very next moment, he knocked down this door and got inside this quest. The question appeared on the board. What made him go inside curiosity, courage, recklessness? He chose recklessness without thinking, but his friend said that he had to answer curiosity because the curiosity of a wizard is the flame of knowledge. At the cost of peaceful curiosity sometimes becomes death. Then he was asked a question to which he had to give an answer. What does this magic circle mean? The young man stood inside and watched this circle and immediately realized that this was his luck. The door of the room was slightly open, and from there you could see the light. There was a circle on the floor. The young man thought it all looked like a torture chamber. He first heard the voice of a dead man, who laughed and said that he was a long-awaited guest, and then he saw one who was being tortured. This voice said that if he understood everything perfectly, then it was time for them to have fun. This time, a monster with horns sat on the throne, chained to the wall. At that moment, the young man smelled old, dirty blood. It seemed that no one had come here since the hostel closed. This one laughed and said that the guests really hadn't been here for a long time. This monster told him that he was very bored, so he was going to run away. But in this situation, everything is going well. The young man said it was just a bleat from the prisoner and told him to start acting. This monster understood that the person who came to him was unarmed, and it seemed great to him. He said that he had very simple rules. Then he opened one of the lids of the jug that stood in front of him. You need to guess the pot that contains the dice. If the young man guesses, he will receive a reward, and if he guesses wrong, he will receive a punishment. Then he asked what he is ready to play. The young man understood that this was a simple deception, but he thought it was very cute, and he was certainly playing. This monster all the jugs that were in front of him, so that it was unbearable to track in which jug the cube was located. The young man immediately pointed to one of the jugs and said that the dice was in it. It was an amazing game, and he won Paris. The devil reward was magical power plus 1 point. The young man thought about what his brain makes him think, but the reward is not so bad. The monster said that he hadn't done this for a long time, so it turns out that without taking away, maybe he will agree to play again. This time they will play for 2 units of magic power. The young man turned around and began to leave. He said that for him, this is not a significant reward. The monster went to the bank and said that he was ready to play for 10 points. Just let him stop. Kim Sun stopped, looked at him, and thought that he was probably starting to understand, and he was clearly caught. The devil said that even he couldn't just give away such a reward, so that everything would be fair. The young man also had to make a bet. Kim Sun asked him what he wanted him to bet in exchange for the reward he would give him. The devil said that such a non-entity as he is nothing but a soul. The young man thought that he had finally discovered the truth of intention. I was skillful with the first 2 games. He loses on purpose, then raises the stakes to eventually take the soul. These are the words that the same guy told him. The devil began to say that after the hostel was closed, he was left here alone, and now a fresh soul was tempting him. The young man said that if he raises his reward to 20, he might think about it some more. The devil got very angry and started shouting that the young man was a freak and was playing with him without correcting him. Kim Sun answered him that he plays like that because he has a head on his shoulders. He has 500 willpower. Isn't he afraid of missing out? The devil thought he had never encountered a soul with such willpower before, and drool started to flow from his mouth. The next thing the devil said was that he agreed and he was ready to start the next game. The devil said that he would show the young man the true art of cruces, and he began to move the pots around him at high speed. The young man looked at the whole picture and thought that he was a serious swindler. The devil stopped 3 pots in front of the young man and said that today his fate was being decided and he had to make his choice. What happened next was unexpected even for the devil. The young man grabbed him by the jaw. Then he pressed with all his might on its mouth so that the devil opened his mouth, and in his mouth was that very cube. The young man said that he made his choice and this cube is here. The young man told the devil to give up his magic power because he lost the game. I tried to persuade him to the last game. He didn't want to let him go, but no one was going to talk to him anymore. Kim Sun turned around and went on. He won this game of the devil he defeated. His reward was magic power plus 20 points. He became a terrible craftsman. Then he opened his competition window and looked at his indicators. His physical strength had increased to 801. His magical power was already 24 points, and his intuition was 58 points. He was still not enough. He lacked magical power and intuition. After completing this quest, he returned to the hostel where he was located. He decided that he should adjust his mana. He needed to take an elixir in order to quickly restore mana. He held a small stone in his palm. It was a stone that he could breathe from the soul. The girl from the alchemy book said that for destroying this stone with magical power, they give a reward. The young man decided to try it. He wanted to check it on himself. He opened one of the vials to restore his mana. She shouted to him that it was very dangerous. He thought that this was the fastest way to understand magical power, intuition. But if all this was exactly like that, then he thought that he could withstand such a danger. He activated this stone on his palm and saw on the board that he was invited to the magic power meter of the Arrowfruit Magic School. He was also warned that his soul could run out. So if he felt dizzy or tremor in his legs, he should immediately release the soul inhalation stone. There was also a warning that mana could run out very quickly, and she screamed at the speed that he was a scammer and that she had fallen for this trick. He drank all the vials he had, and the soul inhalation stone was destroyed by magical power. His reward was another +2 points of magical power and +1 point of intuition. He said that he was moving on. The next thing that happened was that he received a warning that his mana was on the verge of exhaustion. He had no choice but to take a few more bottles of this liquid. He thought it was strong. After some time, there was not a single full bottle left on the table. He drank them all. The girl with the alchemy book started screaming that it was dangerous to continue. Kim-sun at this moment began to turn into a monster. His body began to change. He tried to find at least one more bottle, but there was not a single one on the table. He took a deep breath in and out and then thought about how it was all over, and he wasn't happy with it. He took out a storage bag and decided that he should collect all the mana tinctures that were in this city. The girl in the book didn't understand because he drank so much and again decided to buy these expensive tinctures. She didn't know where he got so much money from. The young man did not explain anything to her. He turned around and headed for the exit. He said that he had other things to do. She shouldn't worry, it was completely safe. At this time in the palace, one of your subordinates came to report. The man sitting at the head of the table asked where it was discovered and was told that it was first discovered in the Golden City. Then he looked at this coin and asked what he thought about it. It was the head of the coalition of merchants, Governor General Hornico. He wanted to know if they were really sure that it was the guy who robbed the vault 8 years ago. They told him that it was a rumor, but they said that recently there was a strange guy in the summoning palace and he had exactly the same name. The head of the coalition of merchants said that his name is really Kim-sun Sol. It is just not clear how he got to the conscription palace. His assistant replied that the reason was unknown, but he really did appear there, so he would definitely show up in the Golden City. The head of the coalition ordered his assistant to contact the guild to kill and told them not to worry about money. It was necessary to demand the strongest and bravest. Immediately after this conversation, the assistant went to the Assassins Guild to hire them. The head of the coalition thought that this time they would definitely not let him go. He had no other choice. This night was quite dark, and it was raining and lightning was flashing. A request came to the Assassin Guild, but the enemy was not simple at all. One of the guys said, was it ever so that they couldn't kill someone? When the assistant passed on this request, the head wanted to know who it was that this request was sent to. The assistant said that the request came to the enemy of the world. The gentleman replied that in that case it is very good because your reward should be excellent. Gentleman was the eldest son of the Almeria family, Kaz Almeria. The son asked in what terrible way to kill the enemy of peace. He was ready to do it immediately.